Hey guys! Part 9 of What If Naruto discovers a crashed starship and trained under the Sith Lord's spirit. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 18 36.4 BBY, current year. Seated at the Hokage's desk was a person that most would never have thought or considered for the position. That person was Shimura Danzo. However, he wasn't actually the Hokage, merely the temporary Godame, until Jiraiya returned. Most of the Ninja Council, however, believed that Tsunade would not be coming back and that either Jiraiya would have to become Hokage, or that he would try to worm his way underneath the hat. While that wasn't far from the truth and he did have aspirations for the position of Hokage, his plans did not involve him becoming Hokage at that moment in time. The village may not be ready for him to take the position, especially with people's opinions of him being so low. Many had never even heard of him, and in order to be Hokage he would need a majority vote by the Jonin ninja in the village. This was something that he didn't think he could get, but that wasn't what he was currently after. Given that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was gone and that he had been unable to find the boy using his resources, he found an alternative method. The rumors of Orochimaru's death began circulating in the last week, but no one was really sure who was responsible. Danzo, however, was certain that the container had been responsible for the Snake Sanin's death. He had his root forces go into Sound Country to investigate, and they did manage to find Orochimaru's underground bunker, as well as the headless body of the Snake Sanin, but no sign of the container. Also, the council still didn't know that the boy had faked his death, but he had a feeling that Jiraiya did. He was confident in his assumption, but that also meant that Jiraiya had not, and may not be planning on informing the council either, and was now completely engrossed in finding Tsunade for the position of Hokage. That didn't sit well with him, as the longer they waited, the more time the Kyuubi container had to disappear. Just a week after Jiraiya left, he asked for a meeting with the Fire Daimyo. Using his Sharingan, he convinced the Fire Daimyo to accept a temporary Hokage under the grounds that it would take quite a long time for Jiraiya to find and either return with Tsunade or return without her. The village was in great need of repair from the damage caused by the battle, and order as well as guidance were needed. Orochimaru's snake summons and the Ichibi container had caused quite some damage to the village before Jiraiya had stopped them. Someone had to take charge to oversee the reconstruction and make sure the village didn't seem weak. He had therefore promptly put his name into consideration as temporary Hokage. With his manipulation of the Fire Daimyo, he easily won. While he had spent a great deal of time putting the village back in order since his appointment, he also didn't neglect his hidden agenda and the real reason why he went to such trouble getting the position. With the position of Hokage came the responsibility of divvying out missions to the village ninja. While it was a tiresome ritual, it afforded him absolute control over where the village ninja went and what missions were accepted. This was the key to his plan, as instead of just accepting any mission he could, he methodically chose missions that would take Konoha ninja to areas that he had not yet searched for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki in. His root forces were only so large, and he could only search so many areas. The key to his plan was that with the entire village at his command, he could increase his chances of finding evidence, or encountering the Jinchuriki outside the village. Should that happen, then with his power as acting Hokage, he would be able to send a force of ninja to retrieve the boy and bring him back to the village. He was even able to accept and assign missions to some of his root forces. These missions were of course off the books, and the money went directly to his foundation. Not only was he enlarging his search for the escaped container, but he was helping the village and helping his root forces at the same time. He might even be able to begin expanding his operation with the money and recruit new ninja with his position. Perhaps if he performed well enough during the time before Jiraiya returned, it would even improve his public image, and since he had never been Hokage before, it was also good experience for when the full position was actually his. He also learned that when he became Hokage, he would need multiple secretaries to take care of the redundant paperwork. Despite his plan and a month of being acting Hokage, he had yet to receive any information that would even hint to the whereabouts of said Jinchuriki. However, he knew it was only a matter of time before the boy slipped up and was noticed. Tsunade frowned as she traveled back to Konoha. Despite swearing that she would never return, she now had to. Stupid Jiraiya, she thought, and glared at the man as he wrote down something in his notebook. I can't believe I fell for his act and trick, she thought, and contemplating knocking him out and then running away. He had found her in Tanzakugai and proceeded to try and convince her to come back and become Hokage. At the time she laughed at him and believed him to be completely crazy, thinking that she would ever come back. However, Jiraiya was tenacious, even more so than she remembered. He spent days pestering her, telling her about all the good she could do in the village. He told her about the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, and she was actually impressed at the container's thinking. At the time, she thought perhaps she should think about faking her death as well. The days, however, turned into over a week, and little by little Jiraiya whittled away her resolve. Now she felt pathetic that he could guilt-trip her like that, but Jiraiya did reveal to her several things that actually changed her view of him, a little bit. Jiraiya confessed that when he had returned to the village, he remembered that Minato and Kushina had decided to name their child after the main character in his book. Jiraiya claimed it was something that he had completely forgotten until he had been back to the village and near the hot springs. He then told her that because of the naming he was also the container's godfather, and after the village was attacked by the Kyuubi, he just forgot about it and never went back for over 12 years. The regret wasn't fake, she knew that. Jiraiya even confided in her, while drunk, that had he been in the boy's life, then perhaps Naruto wouldn't have turned out the way he had. Perhaps he wouldn't have disliked the village and left. Other things were mentioned by the very talkative and drunk Jiraiya, and while she didn't want to admit it, she did find herself feeling badly for her former teammate. She also saw parallels between herself and the runaway Jinchuriki. She didn't really touch her drink that night, which was a first in a long time. Jiraiya mentioned how Naruto would be hunted down, while when she had left, nothing really happened. The village just let her leave despite her position, and never tried to get her back. He talked about how the village still hated the boy, and that hatred had caused a very promising ninja to leave the village. He even mentioned something about a group of S-rank ninja that may be after him, and that the boy didn't know about it. After Jiraiya had said all those things, he mentioned that the Jinchuriki left out of selfish reasons, and then she realized that she and the container weren't that different. It left a bad taste in her mouth. Jiraiya then asked how Shizen was doing, and she was about to reply when a thought suddenly hit her. How was Shizen doing? Her answer would have been fine, but something made her wonder if that word had any real meaning when describing a person's state of being. If Shizen was fine, then did that mean Shizen was content? Happy? Sad? She had honestly never really thought about until that moment. They always managed to get by, staying in different places, losing money, running from her debts, and seeing the world, but how was her apprentice really doing? Did Shizen want to keep traveling? She was intent on staying away from Konoha for the rest of her life and never settling down in any ninja village, or perhaps even in a single village. Did Shizen want the same thing, and did she really want her apprentice to have that kind of life? For the rest of the time with Jiraiya, until they went to their separate rooms, those questions plagued her. It got even worse the next morning when she asked Shizen how she was doing, and her apprentice replied, "I'm fine, Swanda-sama." Of course, just something like that wouldn't be able to get her back to the village. She still had loads of reasons why she wouldn't go back. That all changed, however, when Jiraiya proposed a bet. She couldn't possibly pass on it, as Jiraiya offered to pay off all her debts. She was of course suspicious whether the pervert even had that kind of money. Her debts were quite substantial. Jiraiya promptly showed her his checkbook, and she got a look at the numbers. The damn pervert was worth a fortune. Not a huge fortune, but more than enough to pay off her debts. She couldn't believe that it was all from sales of his perverted books, and she remembered Shizen commenting on how scary it was that the world was full of that many perverts. Should she lose the bet, then she would have to become Hokage. Despite Shizen's wishes, she accepted the bet. In fact, not only did she accept the bet, she won the bet. The money had been hers, and then when Jiraiya was about to fill out the check, he stopped and had wagered, double or nothing? Remembering that moment made her strike out and punch the nearest tree, which sent it splintering into two parts, and was followed by a crashing sound as the upper half collapsed into the forest. Jiraiya quickly put his notebook away and prepared to run if his former teammates' anger shifted to him, but Tsunade completely ignored it. "Why do I always fall for that?" she lamented. The money was practically in her grasp, but she couldn't turn down the new offer. She lost, and now they were nearly at Konoha. The thought of skipping out on the deal had crossed her mind several times, but Jiraiya would never forgive her. He also stated that if she didn't honor the bet, he would collect every debt she owed, so she would owe him all the money. She was all for it until he mentioned that he would be asking her to repay him and work off her debt to him. It was a disturbing threat, especially with the amount of lecherousness, innuendo, and eyebrow wagging that went into the statement. Compared to that, the position of Hokage didn't seem that bad, however, given the recent news of Orochimaru's supposed death and the reconstruction of the village. She knew she had her hands full and would likely be drowned in paperwork. Should have faked my death too. Two illusionary figures of Itachi and Kisame appeared in a room and stared at a third figure that was the leader of Akatsuki, Pain. The figures appeared as something of holograms, but it was really a technique, Gentashin no Jutsu, magic lantern body technique, used by the leader of Akatsuki to communicate with the members of his group from vast distances. "Did you find the Kyuubi Jinchuriki in Snow Country?" asked the leader of Akatsuki. "We did," replied Itachi, and he did not say any more. "Were you able to capture him then?" inquired Pain, as he was wondering why Itachi would give him such a short response. "We were not able to capture him." "Why not?" asked Pain in a more dangerous tone. Two of the strongest members of Akatsuki should have been able to capture one lone Jinchuriki. He had at least 7 others with him, and it turned out to be an ambush. Sasori's spy was also helping the Jinchuriki and can no longer be trusted. The container appeared to be leading them, but it was difficult to tell. Few words were exchanged between anyone, but they were well organized and coordinated nonetheless. "We were both injured and put in a position where either we would both be killed trying to capture the Kyuubi or we would succeed. However, the probability was not in our favor. I could not understand what jutsu several members of their group were using, and 2 members seemed to be immune to all physical attacks," stated Itachi, but Kisame just kept his thoughts to himself. "So the Kyuubi has a group of his own," mused Pain at the new development. Jinchuriki forming powerful groups was not something he had considered. They were supposed to be isolated individuals that were shunned by the world and kept to be a deterrent to war. "Brats, every one of them," Kisame chimed in, as he was irritated at being so injured and forced to flee. "And yet you were unsuccessful when you fought them," Pain reminded him, and Kisame scowled. "What are our orders, leader?" asked Itachi, as he ignored Kisame's anger. Pain thought for a few moments and then said, "If the Kyuubi and his group are getting that powerful, then we can't risk sending anyone after him at this time. No doubt both of you and your battle attracted some attention. The Kyuubi must be sealed last, and sending more Akatsuki after him might draw more unwanted attention to our group. What we should do is let Konoha know that their Jinchuriki is still alive and his whereabouts. Then they will capture him for us, deal with his group, and then take him back to the village. We will then know exactly where he is when the time comes to go after him again," concluded Pain, and he thought of ways to let slip the information to Konoha. Itachi took the opportunity to add something he had been holding back. "While we were in Snow Country, a team of Konoha Nina was also on the island, and I believe that Hatake Kakashi followed us and saw the battle. It's likely that he recognized the Jinchuriki and would report back to Konoha. It's possible that the squad is already back in the village and reporting that information. Kakashi was the Yondaime student, so he should recognize Naruto," Itachi thought. "We should send Zetsu then, to make sure the container does not leave the island before Konoha shinobi arrive." "You're sure that the Jinchuriki would have been recognized?" asked Pain. "Yes, Kisame and I looked for transport off the island and found the group in a rush to leave on the only available ship. We ended up taking Kisame's summons back to the mainland because of it," recalled Itachi, and Pain nodded as the images faded away. Itachi stopped himself from sighing in relief. The outcome was what he wanted all along. Konoha should be the safest place for Naruto, though he didn't want to admit that the boy had gathered together quite a group of talented ninja. By the time we are ready to capture him, I don't think even Pain could face that group by himself. Itachi thought while remembering the odd abilities that the demon brothers had acquired. He still hadn't been able to figure out what they were actually using. His Sharingan had told him next to nothing about the technique. However, that also didn't bode well for the Konoha ninja that went after the group to capture Naruto. Looking over to Kisame, he could see his teammate was still examining the scar left by the QB container. It was a vertical white scar that showed up rather well in contrast to Kisame's blue skin. The blemish was apparently from Naruto's sword and the wound had nearly killed Kisame. Had the nuke knee not been merged with Samehada, then he would have died. For some reason, the wound had not healed, despite Samehada's healing abilities. It should have healed completely and shown nothing but smooth skin, however that was not the case. He had already gone over the wound with a healing jutsu as Kisame had been complaining of periodic pain from the injury, despite it having already healed to a scar. Itachi found nothing wrong with the scar or beneath the surface. The wound was as healed as it would ever be. He told Kisame it was likely something psychological that was causing the phantom pains which the blue-skinned man vehemently denied. Despite this thought, he also knew that Kisame could handle quite a bit of pain before complaining about it. Therefore, it must have hurt quite a bit. Perhaps it isn't just all in his head? Itachi wondered as he glanced at the scar again. A door opened and Plagueeyes stepped into the dark cell. He smirked as Gato's eyes adjusted to the light, and he viewed the chained Kabuto. It hadn't taken him long at all to figure out that it was Kabuto who had given their position to the group known as Akatsuki. Despite Kabuto's willingness to fight and from what he found from reading the teen's mind, regret over giving up their position, something had to be done. It had taken him only a few days to figure out exactly what that something was. He couldn't let Kabuto go unpunished, but there was also the problem of loyalty. Though he didn't want to admit it, Naruto was right and Kabuto would make an excellent research assistant for him. Kabuto's medical ninjutsu and abilities were not common, and not something that he was willing to just throw away, so killing the teen was difficult. He thought about taking over Kabuto's body, but that brought other problems as well. Gato was a good choice to possess because the short man had a weak mind and was a civilian. Taking over a ninja could prove more troublesome or perhaps negatively affect him. He didn't want to take that kind of chance. However, he also couldn't keep having problems with the teen, and the days he took thinking it over had been quite fortuitous. The results of his work were hidden behind his back in his right hand. Moving across the room and closer to the chained Kabuto, the smirk on Gato's face faded as Plagueeyes became serious. You've caused quite a bit of trouble, but you already know that. I also know how much you want to travel to the galaxy. I could just kill you for your actions, or perhaps I could take over your body similar to how your previous master could do. Plagueeyes mused as his vision left Kabuto and inspected the surrounding wall, and then looked back as if expecting Kabuto to plead for his life. Kabuto grit his teeth and knew he was in the worst position. He desperately wanted to go with them, but there was nothing he could do if Plagueeyes decided to do any of those things. However, I am a compassionate being, Plagueeyes lied and continued, but I still think you deserve punishment. I could torture you until the ship is ready, or perhaps have the demon brothers do it. They have asked on more than one occasion if they could deal with you. Kabuto understood that his life was in Plagueeyes' hands. He knew Naruto would be too busy to come to his aid or perhaps speak on his behalf. He wasn't even sure if Naruto knew he had betrayed the group or what the boy might do if he found out. It didn't take very long for me to figure you out, said Plagueeyes to the now confused Kabuto. Every person has motivation or reasons, and yours were quite easy to determine. You, Kabuto, are not a leader. No, you are but a shadow. Someone that follows in the footsteps of others but has no determination to stand on your own. You may not have even known this until Orochimaru was killed. Perhaps you still haven't realized it. There was no master to follow, and you didn't know what to do. Deep down, I'm not even sure that you really hate Naruto for killing Orochimaru. Perhaps you'll realize that, given some time, but your anger really comes from the fact that my student took away your only purpose. Following others was what you did. You became a spy in Konoha under Sasori and were noticed by Orochimaru. Your mission was to become part of Orochimaru's organization, and at some point you turned from one master to another. But after what Naruto did, there was no one to keep the light off you. No one's shadow to stay behind anymore. You probably felt confusion, frustration, hopelessness, loss, fear, and many other useless emotions that eventually turned into anger, and you directed that at my student. When Naruto made you a part of our organization, he never asked you to change, and perhaps that was the problem. Instead of accepting us and myself as your master, you retreated back to your first master, Sasori. You gave away our location and nearly compromised our whole operation. Therefore, for your punishment, I give you a gift. Plagueyes stated with a smirk and revealed what was in his right hand. A gift. Kabuto stuttered and cursed at the way he must have sounded in front of Plagueyes. He couldn't imagine why he would be getting a gift. What Plagueyes revealed from behind his back was a large syringe filled with a gray material. It looked like a liquid, but it was difficult to tell how viscous it actually. Yes, a gift. Since you seem so fond of your old masters and can't possibly survive without them or work with us without them, I decided to provide you with something that would take care of that. I'll let you have a piece of your old master, Orochimaru, so that he is with you always. That way you can work with us and never be separated from him. How does that sound? Asked Plagueyes with a smirk. Kabuto was beginning to see where Plagueyes was headed, and he wasn't sure he liked it. Inside the syringe must have been Orochimaru's cells, and he was about to be injected with them. Hopefully the cells won't take over your body, because if they do, we'll have to kill you. So just hold on, Kabuto, and you'll most likely keep your sanity and personality intact as the transformation takes place, said Plagueyes as the hand holding the syringe moved to the defenseless and bound Kabuto. The needle pierced through his arm, and Kabuto watched in morbid fascination as Plagueyes injected the material into his body. The skin in the area around the injection began to lighten and then turned to a light gray. Kabuto's eyes widened as the area began to slowly grow before his eyes. He could feel his cells being converted or transformed, and he could see the transformation occurring. It shouldn't be happening that fast, he noted as he stared at the infected area. At first he only felt cold and then a numbness, but the pain soon started, and as Plagueyes left the room, Kabuto was screaming in agony from what was happening to him. Looking to Gozu, who was stationed outside the door, he said, "When it's finished, give him the cloak to cover himself, and then bring him to the lab for testing. I want to determine if everything went properly," stated Plagueyes, and the Kiri ninja nodded. Leaving the area, Plagueyes headed back to his lab to continue his reading on Orochimaru's research and notes. The syringe he had just given Kabuto was derived from Orochimaru's cells from the head that Naruto had brought back. He didn't think it would be useful to him, but now it turned out that it was. Using Sith alchemy, he altered the cells slightly, and created what could be called a Sith potion. Normally the process was used to create a Sith spawn and even mix the traits of species with the traits of others and create something unique and powerful. His work was really no different. Kabuto was basically turning into a Sith spawn. The transformation was much simpler than the one used for the Demon Brothers, but he expected very good results. The subject should have been made into a mindless animal that only took orders from him, but he was confident that Kabuto would retain his mind, knowledge, and abilities despite the transformation. That was exactly what happened to the Demon Brothers, and he therefore expected similar results. However, the new Kabuto would become more loyal to him as time went by due to the alchemy and his modifications. Kabuto would be bonded to him in a similar way that the Demon Brothers were bonded to Naruto. Yes, he will make an excellent research assistant. And should the need arise, I could seal my holocron into his arm and use him as a means of transportation and physical action. Similar to what I did with Naruto before I took Gato's body, thought Plagueyes, and the screams of Kabuto slowly decreased in volume the farther away he got from the cell. Orochimaru's cells were highly parasitic, and just simple experimentation showed that they would take over a host's body upon injection. However, what would normally take months for Kabuto to transform completely would be taking mere hours or perhaps even shorter with the addition of Sith alchemy. Kabuto should be done changing by the end of the day. Sitting in a meditative position, Naruto didn't move a single inch except for his rhythmic breathing. His clones, however, were quite busy. 30 versions of himself were in what had been dubbed the hangar bay and working on the ship's new reactor. After a day of struggling and failure, Naruto quickly found that using his clones on a single task such as the reactor was a bad idea. Having so many clones along with himself just didn't work. Whereas they could work completely independently, he discovered that when working on one complex task, multitasking with his independent clones actually slowed him down. Because they each thought individually, the clones took it upon themselves to begin working on individual parts. However, the problem came when beginning to assemble those parts and with the tools available. While the clones could do the work, there was a particular order in which everything had to be done. One part had to be completed and installed before the combined part could be used somewhere else. His clones didn't really grasp the overall picture and failure was inevitable. There was a critical path to the construction, and should one problem be encountered along that path, then the length of the project, beginning to end, was increased. The main problem he was having was that his clones were too independent. They finished tasks before the other critical tasks were completed, and then he had to stop and figure out what went wrong. So far he had disassembled a certain part of the reactor 4 times because his clones had completed only part of the device and neglected to get all the pieces together before assembling that part. Taking the reactor and fuel assembly apart was infinitely easier than building and constructing a new one with his clones. He never experienced the problem before because nothing he had done up to that point had been so complicated and had so many individual tasks that formed a single multifaceted project. Then there was the problem with tools. He only had a given number of sophisticated tools, and with so many clones working, things got misplaced or one clone couldn't find the needed tool because another clone had it. This inevitably slowed everything down as well because he had clones just walking around and trying to find a tool that was being used by another clone halfway across the room. That was just the first day of construction, and he ended up killing all of his clones in anger and frustration. Surprisingly, he then had to begin suppressing the QB's chakra as apparently his anger and frustration began calling a very small amount of it forth when he certainly didn't even want or need it. Taking a break from the reactor, despite not having the time needed to actually take a break, he had meditated on the problem and wound up stumbling upon the best way to work with his clones on such a complex task. The key he discovered was to step back and take himself out of the project. Normally that idea would seem foolish as he was the original and the leader, but that was his problem in the first place. He wasn't actually leading the clones, and given how independently they thought and worked, they needed extra supervision and guidance on such a project. They couldn't see the bigger picture. That was the reason why he was currently meditating. Using his force connection with his clones, he was actually supervising all 30 at the same time. Each one was getting explicit guidance and instruction from him on what they should be doing. Each clone could therefore just focus on a single task, and he would worry about the critical path and getting everything put together correctly in the least amount of time. The method was far better than anything he had previously, and he was sure that in the future he would be using it on any complex tasks for his clones. Even the tool problem was solved as he could tell which clones had what tools and then get the right tools to the right clones. With perfect timing and coordination, one clone threw a tool to another and continued working without any problems. The clone reached up and caught the tool but stayed perfectly focused on what it was doing. The new method was so smooth and coordinated that he was making great progress despite the first day's setback. He didn't start out at 30 clones though, he actually started at only 10 and had worked his way up to 30 in the past week. By the following week he might have 50, and then he would likely be able to complete the task by the deadline he had. Based on calculations by both his master and himself, it would take between 2 weeks and 1 month for someone to come to Snow Country. A journey by boat to the island country took a week, and both groups had already been gone for that long. That, however, assumed that they didn't have another mode of transportation that was faster. Neither was sure which group would be coming, as it was still possible that Akatsuki would send more ninja, or perhaps Itachi and Kisame would come back. It was also just as possible, if not more possible, that Konoha would also send ninja to Snow Country. The group that was there had evidently left in a hurry, and Play Guys told him about Hatake Kakashi watching most of the fight. Currently at least 4 members of his group were on patrol. He wasn't completely sure which members as they switched off, but someone was out of the bunker and actively looking for threats. Using a few of his clones, he set up several detection seals in the area around the destroyed castle. At least 2 members of the group were in the main city and harbor of Snow Country and monitoring the people that were entering the country. Most ships went to the main harbor, but it was also possible that Ninja would be dropped off somewhere else or just jump off the boat before reaching the harbor and run to shore. To hopefully prevent this, he had 2 other members of the group patrolling the surrounding area of the destroyed castle. Both pairs had a radio so they could communicate with each other and with the bunker should they find something. He hoped that the ship could be completed, or at least ready enough to leave the area and travel somewhere else on the planet under its own power, by the deadline. However, it would take at least the next week to complete, test, and then install the reactor on the ship. Keeping his mind as calm as possible, Naruto pushed back all his doubts and fears, focusing entirely on his clones and the project. It was a race against the clock and he likely wouldn't be able to sleep much before the deadline. Team 7 raced through the trees of Fire Country as they neared the village. Kakashi set quite the pace for his students, and he lied saying that it was for training. He wasn't about to tell Sasuke that he had seen Itachi or the possibility of Orochimaru having been in Snow Country. The real reason he set such a pace was so he could report to Jiraiya about what he had seen. He already sent one of his Niken ahead of him, and hoped it would be able to find Jiraiya. When he left the village for his mission, Jiraiya had only just left in search of Tsunade so she could be Hokage when they returned. Ninja decisions were being made by the temporary Hokage, Danzo, whom he would have to talk with if Jiraiya wasn't back yet. Landing on the main road, the group moved towards the village and slowed down as they neared the main gate. Running straight into the village would definitely cause some alarm, so he calmed himself down and set a sedate pace. He would dismiss his students right after they got into the village and then find Pakken, who was likely waiting for him near the gate. He casually greeted the 2 Chunin gate guards with his book out and then dismissed his team, telling them that he would fill out a mission report. Continuing down the main road, he picked up his Ninken's trail and turned down a side alley. Despite the crowded street, he made sure to stay as unnoticed as possible. Walking down the alley, he glanced over the top of his book and noted the small pug that peeked around the corner and spotted him. As Kakashi rounded the corner, he came upon Pakken and the dog turned its head to indicate the other person that wasn't standing very far away. Jiraiya looked over at Kakashi and wondered what was going on. He had only just gotten back with Tsunade and they had barely been to see the ninja council when he was accosted by the small dog. And I was just about to do some research. He lamented but decided that whatever Kakashi had to tell him must have been important if the man sent a summons ahead of him before making it to the village. Kakashi put away his book and became serious. While I was in Snow Country on a mission with my team, I saw Uchiha Itachi and Hashigaki Kisame. They were both wearing the black cloaks with red clouds that you described to me. Jiraiya's eyes widened as he now knew 2 more members of the group known as Akatsuki. However, he had the sudden thought of why would those 2 be in Snow Country? Did you follow them? Kakashi nodded and then told Jiraiya of everything his shadow clones saw before being destroyed. He mentioned his thoughts on Orochimaru having a base in Snow Country and possibly being there. Jiraiya couldn't believe what he was hearing. Given the rumors, he knew that Orochimaru was likely dead and had a hunch that Naruto was the person that was in Snow Country. Does that mean he killed Orochimaru? He wondered but didn't dwell on it. He needed to focus on all the new information. Apparently Naruto had created or at least recruited a group of ninja that were enough to stand up against 2 S-ranked ninja. Kakashi, according to the rumors that have been circulating through the elemental countries for just over a week, Orochimaru is dead. Jiraiya revealed, and Kakashi was shocked at the information. His first instinct was that it must have been Kabuto, but Jiraiya was about to squash that thought. I probably should have told you this earlier, but I have proof that Uzumaki Naruto faked his death and is still alive, Jiraiya said as he glanced around and made sure they were alone at the intersection of alleyways. If the earlier news had shocked Kakashi, then he was completely taken aback by the new information. He faked his death. He ran the words through his mind and he really couldn't understand why. Did your clone happen to see this person? Jiraiya asked while pulling out a photograph of a red-haired grass ninja. Kakashi's single eye examined the photograph and he tried to remember exactly what his clone had seen during the fighting. He did remember 2 redheads, but they were too far away for his clone to see exact facial features. He only noted the one redhead as being part of Orochimaru's guard because of her general appearance, and because Kabuto was there, so it made sense that she was the redhead in the group that helped kill the Sandaime. Thinking back to the other figures, he knew he couldn't identify most of them, but the girl in the picture did seem to have the same characteristics as the second redhead he saw. He also realized that the person he saw in the cloak must have been Naruto. There were two redheads there. One I believe worked for Orochimaru, and this does resemble the other, but I was never able to get a good view of her face. Responded Kakashi, and Jiraiya nodded before putting the photo away. So she still might be alive. Jiraiya thought and was thankful for the information. Naruto was heading down a dark path, but knowing that the girl was still alive gave him hope that he could convince, or at least get Naruto to come back to the village. Are you going to be assembling a team then? Asked Kakashi, and Jiraiya wanted to curse as he realized he would have to wait. No, not yet, he admitted, and before Kakashi could say anything he continued, Danzo is currently the temporary Hokage until Tsunade gets inaugurated. We'll have to wait a few days until that happens before taking a team to go after him. Otherwise people will start asking questions. I never told the village elders or the ninja council about Naruto still being alive. I hope to find him before anyone found out or Naruto became known outside of the village. Apparently Akatsuki is already a step or two ahead of us and also knows about Naruto not being dead and leading the village. I don't even know how that happened or where they got the information from, Jiraiya admitted. There will be a team, and I guess you won't take no for an answer, so you'll be on it. Who else in the village would be able to help us? Questioned Jiraiya, as despite being very good at planning a mission, he was out of touch with the village and the ninja ranks. Kakashi quickly thought about it, and knew several ninja that would be good for the mission. Mato Guy for one was definitely someone that could help. He knew he couldn't take his own team because of the possibility of Itachi showing back up, but, though he was reluctant to admit it, Guy's team was strong and well suited for the mission. He also thought about Tenzo from Anbu because of his Mokutan ability, and the fact that Naruto likely didn't want to come back. A capture squad would be good, and perhaps at least one chakra sensor, but he wasn't sure who would be available. He knew the village couldn't spare many ninja at that point in time, and would leave the decision up to the new Hokage. Telling Jiraiya of the information, the Toad Sannin readily agreed but had no idea of who Guy's students were. Kabuto looked over his body once more as he sat in the chains. The transformation brought upon by the syringe Plagueyes had injected him with seemed to be over. He wasn't sure how long it had lasted, but he certainly didn't want to go through it again. The pain had been excruciating. Most people would have been completely disgusted to have their body altered to such a degree, but he found it completely fascinating. He was immensely curious to see what the changes did for him, and couldn't wait to have his chakra fully unsealed to see what he could do. Interestingly enough, he now had a snake appendage that appeared to be coming out of his body like a tail. It seemed rather intelligent, and he could communicate with it on some level without even speaking. His entire body also appeared to be covered in large grayish-white snake scales, and he couldn't wait to examine himself with his diagnostic jutsu. Perhaps this is why he said it was a gift, he mused. Orochimaru's cells had merged with his own, but he wasn't taken over by his former master. He might look like a monster in the eyes of others, but he honestly couldn't be happier. If this was the trade-off for getting to travel with Plagueyes and Naruto to the galaxy they talked about, then he was all for it. Kukukukukuku. He laughed, and he could feel minute vibrations through the floor that let him know someone was approaching. Goza entered the room with the cloak that Plagueyes had given him. He looked at Kabuto and chuckled. I'm not sure if he really transformed. Maybe Master Plagueyes just brought out his true form, he mused, and tossed the dark red cloak to Kabuto. Crouching down near the snake person, he held out his hand, which turned into tendrils of smoke, and moved the smoke to the chains that were binding Kabuto. The smoke entered the keyhole and released the locks. He then released the chakra seals and other bindings that Kabuto had. Master Plagueyes wants to see you in the lab and inspect your changes, Goza stated, and Kabuto followed the Kiri ninja as he was led to the lab. Idly, Kabuto wondered whether they would be concerned over Orochimaru taking over his body, but something told him that Plagueyes may have been bluffing. Though the cells had merged with him, he really couldn't feel another consciousness in the cells or in his body. Perhaps he was just trying to scare me, he considered, but didn't really mind. I can't wait to see what all the changes are. 7 days later. Jiraiya grimaced once again as Mato Guy vomited over the side of their boat. The very green, both in face and body attire, Taijutsu specialist had no idea that he was prone to seasickness up until the boat began its journey. Jiraiya idly wondered if the man would survive the remainder of the trip to Snow Country. They had been on the boat for about 5 days, as had taken 2 days before the inauguration was held and Tsunade was made Godame Hokage. Tsunade's first action as Hokage was to sanction the mission, and he knew he owed her for doing it. The other ninjas Tsunade sent on the mission were faring much better than Guy, but Jiraiya glared slightly at the 2 members of Guy's team that he had met before. Ironically, they had more insight in the mission than nearly every other ninja on the mission. There had been a short briefing, but only a few members actually knew what was going on. Team 9, Kakashi, the ANBU named Yamato, a medical ninja, Team 8, and himself were on the mission. He hadn't planned on taking so many brats with him, but from what Kakashi said, most of Naruto's group were ninja that were under the age of 20, with most being just older than the peacetime genin graduation age. The village also didn't have many higher-ranked ninja that were available at the moment. He had told Kurenai and Guy that their teams would be held back during any fighting, but was glad for the tracking team and the 2 Hyuga members that he had. If the group was still in Snow Country, which he assumed they still were given how few boats go to and leave from the country, then there was likely an underground base and the Byakugan would come in handy for finding it. 12 ninja was a lot to send on a single mission, but he was sure Naruto was there, and from what Kakashi said, they would be facing about 9 ninja. The village couldn't spare any more, but judging from what he did have, he had taken most of the highest-ranking jonin away from the village. He had a bad feeling that something could happen to the village while they were gone, but kept those feelings to himself. At that moment he needed to focus on the mission and come up with strategies. Despite having Naruto's file, he really had no idea what the boy was capable of in battle. Few people in the village had ever seen Naruto fight before, as most of his missions for the village didn't involve many battles or any witnesses. Sitting behind a thick wall of hardened mud, Naruto prepared an initial test of the reactor. His clones had only just finished it, and now he had to at least test the fusion reaction to see if it would work and if the reactor would be suitable to hold in the reaction and provide the necessary power for the ship. He would only be using a small test and just starting the fusion reaction and not supplying it with any additional fuel. Once the test was over, then he could calculate and determine if it would be sufficient. If for some reason it didn't provide enough power to get the ship off the planet and enter hyperspace, then he would have to find something else to power the ship with, but at that moment, either he nor Playguys had any other ideas. Either the reactor would work, or they wouldn't be going. His clones had moved the reactor into an additional room in the bunker, just in case something happened. That way he would minimize any possible damage to the ship should the reactor not function or, well, explode. Given the small reaction inside, less than 1% of what it could do, it likely wouldn't be a large explosion, but it would do quite a bit of damage. Should the test be successful, then he would have to increase the fusion reaction to see if it held at higher outputs. If it succeeded, then he would begin installing the reactor on board the ship, and then they would leave as soon as possible. The others were in the hangar bay and packing everything into scrolls to take on the ship. They would be taking a large amount of ninja supplies and other items with them, but with the scrolls the supplies would barely take up any room on the ship. While his clones attached all the proper components and measuring devices, he set up the laptop computer that would be taking power readings and providing him with real-time information from the reactor. He also had a kill switch to stop the reaction at any point and prevent possible catastrophe. When the clones were ready, Naruto moved behind his protective wall and signaled his clones to begin the reaction. As atoms of hydrogen were introduced into the reactor, they were pushed together so that the nuclei of both atoms or multiple atoms of hydrogen fused together, resulting in the formation of helium as a byproduct. The reaction began and he monitored the status. The power output began steadily increasing until it plateaued at his desired output level. At nearly 1% output of the reactor capacity, he examined the readings and kept the reaction going. The reactor itself was holding and no problems were occurring. Calculating from the output he was getting, He determined the maximum possible output from the reactor and let out a sigh of relief when he found it was just enough for the ship to operate. With the reaction working steadily for several minutes, he decided to begin increasing it. The levels on his monitor steadily rose until he neared 35% of his maximum output. From his position, he could hear the reactor humming with power and looked up over his barricade. There was really nothing to see as the reactor was entirely enclosed, but he imagined what it would look on the inside. "It's going to work," he said to himself and smirked. His clones quickly got ready to install the reactor back onto the ship while he looked through the data and double-checked the numbers. It would be very close, but they would have enough power to get off the planet and into hyperspace. Once installation was complete, they would have to go through a pre-flight check to make sure all systems were working correctly and that there were no other problems. And when that was done, they could finally leave. The boat arrived in the newly named Spring Country 2 days later. Jiraiya and the other Konoha ninja disembarked and walked down the docks and into the harbor area. "Kakashi, we should head to where you saw the battle," stated Jiraiya, and Kakashi took the lead. As they neared the warehouses of the harbor, the group heard a distinctive sound and Guy was hit in the leg by a fast-moving red projectile. "Karen," Jugo said, and the red-headed girl replied, "I know, I can see them just fine. Get the speeder bike ready, I'll do what I can to slow them down." Jugo ran off while Karen used the sight on the rifle and zoomed in. She couldn't identify many of the individuals she was looking at. Oddly, there was even a guy in a kabuki outfit traveling with the group, but she focused on what she did know. Tenten said her sensei was one of the strongest jonin in the village, so she targeted him first. Adjusting for wind and the drop of the blaster bolt over the long distance, she fired a single shot into the green jonin's leg and made sure to miss the artery. She wasn't out to kill them but would still slow them as much as possible and try to eliminate at least a few of them. A brief second passed from when her first shot hit, and the group began taking cover. She fired multiple shots at the rest of the group but realized that she needed to keep moving. They would find a way to come after her at some point, so she shouldn't stay camped where she was. Running from her position with the rifle strapped to her back, she jumped on the back of the speeder bike and Jugo hit the throttle. As the speeder bike took them both away, she got on the radio and began relaying all the information she could. "Guy, are you okay?" asked Kakashi from behind a crate. He had no idea where the attack was coming from but knew that he had incredible difficulty seeing the attacks themselves, and dodging was nearly impossible on the first shot as it had taken them completely by surprise. Guy grimaced at his leg wound and responded, "Just fine, my rival." "Niji, where are the attacks coming from?" he asked his student while trying to ignore the pain, and Niji activated his Byakugan. His actions were quickly followed by Hinata as they looked for the attacker from behind their cover. "I don't see anyone in the area that could be the attacker. There isn't a ninja near us from what I can see," he quickly responded. Kurenai looked to her student and Hinata said, "I can see something. It has two people on it, and they are traveling faster than I can keep up with them." Niji frowned at the information and didn't want to admit that Hinata's Byakugan had a longer range than his did. "Where are they heading?" asked Jiraiya. He didn't know what the girl was seeing that she couldn't describe to them, but he wanted to know where they were going. "It's heading along the coast," responded Hinata, and as she tried to focus and keep up the object, it was heading away so fast that her eyes couldn't zoom in and focus on it fast enough to get a clear view of what it was they were riding on. As the medical ninja tended to Guy and Yamato, who had been grazed in the shoulder, Jiraiya turned to Kakashi and asked, "Where are the ruins of the castle?" "Further inland and not along the coast," responded Kakashi as he could see where the Toad-san's thoughts were headed. Likely the ambush was just a diversion to get them to go off in another direction and chase after the fleeing individuals. Jiraiya looked to the two injured and frowned. Even with all his knowledge of jutsu, he had no idea what kind of ninjutsu was just used on them. What the hell gas Naruto got his hands on? It seemed like some kind of long-range fire jutsu or a fire-enhanced projectile, but whatever it was had burned right through the flesh on Guy's leg and come out the other side, then went straight through the wood of the docks. He sat idly behind the crate he was hiding behind and wondered if they should continue. It would only get more dangerous from here, and Naruto knows we're coming, he realized, as they could even end up walking into another trap again. Looking to the group, he decided to keep moving, but they would be slow and cautious, using the two Hyuga as much as possible. Naruto heard the news over his headset but focused on his tasks. The reactor was completely installed, but they were having trouble starting the engines. The ship had been underwater for over a decade, so he and his clones were looking for any problems. The rest of the ship seemed ready to take off, and all the other systems were working. It would take an hour for the Konoha group to get to the castle ruins from the harbor, and even if they got to the ruins, he had created a few surprises in the bunker system for them. He made sure that the hangar bay was at one of the lowest levels so the ninja couldn't just use an earth jutsu and easily get to the ship. They would have to go through a labyrinth of tunnels that he had created in the past week. Even if they could see into it with the Hyuga that Karen reported seeing, he hoped that the Sith runes and the illusions that was on the room would help. He ordered Karen and Jugo to get back to the ship and would make clones when the Konoha ninja got closer. He wasn't going to leave the ship and wouldn't risk anyone else going off to fight. They would likely be left behind by Playguys in order to protect the ship. Cautiously, the Konoha group made their way through the pine forests and to the higher altitudes where the castle ruins were. The progress was slow, as they would stop every 100 meters or so to take a look around and make sure no one else was laying in wait or setting a trap. As the plateau that the ruined castle was on came into view, tensions rose in the group. Jiraiya had already identified and disabled several pieces of Fuinjutsu that were meant to monitor a small area and alert the person that placed them if that area was disturbed. Team 8 and Niji were actively searching the surrounding area but not finding any traps or ambushes. So far they hadn't had to deal with any more problems, and though Jiraiya had been positive that they would run into several other traps, they hadn't. This made him rather worried, and he could tell the other members of the group were worried too. They were down 2 ninja as Guy's leg wouldn't let him get to the site at the same pace that they could, and though Yamato was with them, his injury prevented him from being a capable fighter. After tearful goodbyes between the 2 green beasts, Kakashi had taken over as temporary captain of Team 9. Considering that there wasn't anyone lying in wait, Jiraiya considered that perhaps this was not the area they were really looking for. Kakashi suspected that the group might be using the newly destroyed castle ruins or perhaps had a base hidden under the surface. There had to be a reason that led 2 members of Akatsuki right to that spot and a reason why Naruto's group attacked. I want both of you to begin looking under the surface for some type of underground room or perhaps levels of the castle that weren't destroyed. Jiraiya ordered, and despite being tired from excessive use of their dojutsu, the 2 Hyuga each went through the seals and activated their bloodline. Looking beneath the surface of the plateau, they quickly found a system of tunnels. The tunnels went in a myriad of different directions but all seemed to keep converging and then branching out. It's like some kind of maze. Niji noted, and he quickly determined the beginning, which oddly enough came from an opening in the ruins. 1 tunnel branched out into 3 and then the maze began. Niji quickly reported what he was seeing and where the entrance was. But where does it end? Wondered Hinata when she heard something happening near her and looked away from the tunnels. A short distance in front of them, a figure was emerging from the ground. It seemed to literally come out of the rock but didn't disturb any part of the surface. The genin noted that the cloaked figure was around their height, perhaps slightly shorter. The figure had a ninjato strapped to its back and the hood mostly covered the face. Naruto, Jiraiya stated, but the figure did not move or acknowledge its name being stated. The group looked to the lone figure, and the genin of the group couldn't figure out why they weren't attacking. Guy's team was ready to fight. Lee was anticipating a good fight, Niji wanted to defeat the cloaked figure, and Tenten wanted the sword. You don't honestly think you can take on all of us, do you? Kakashi asked as he prepared to pull up his forehead protector to reveal his Sharingan. I have backup, the figure stated, and 20 more cloaked figures began coming up from the ground. You just had to say something, Kakashi, didn't you? Thought Kurenai with a frown, and she went over the best strategy for fighting alongside her team. Have you found the problem yet? Asked Playguys to his meditating student. No, I haven't, and my clones on the surface have engaged the Konoha ninja, answered Naruto, and Playguys held back his frown. They were ready to leave, but apparently the ship was still giving last-minute problems. A ship without working engines was just a piece of scrap metal. Power seemed to be going to the engines, but they just weren't starting. The other members on board the ship were all strapped in and waiting to leave. He could feel frustration and tension coming from everyone on the ship. Playguys would have ordered them to go out and fight, but that wasn't something he could really afford. He knew Naruto didn't want any of the group to leave the ship because his student was well aware of the fact that he would leave them behind if the ship was started and they weren't aboard. They were definitely useful, but not as important as the ship and keeping it out of someone else's hands. However, leaving members behind when their journey was only just starting was not the ideal beginning to a group. Trust and loyalty were never something he had to worry about before he died, but now it seemed to be very prominent in all his plans. Fine, just keep meditating and working from where you are. I'm going to go back and consult with the ship's computer, Playguys stated as he left the cockpit and journeyed to the engine room where the other clones were working. Kakashi slammed his hands into the ground to complete his jutsu. A thick wall of mud sprang up in front of him and protected part of the group from a very large combination wind and water technique sent by the clones of Uzumaki Naruto. Despite his wall's strength, the technique began breaking through and he was forced to abandon his defensive position and jump out of the way of the penetrating attack. Putting distance between himself and the clones that were attacking him, he quickly glanced at the other ninja to see how they were doing. Kurenai and Jiraiya seemed to be faring the best against the clones. Genjutsu was indeed one of Naruto's weaknesses, and Kurenai, as well as Team 8, had already destroyed several clones. Her team was also fighting cohesively against the clones and managing to hold their own. Guy's team had broken up despite his orders and were each fighting a clone individually. Jiraiya was facing 6 clones at once and having a difficult time as they weren't letting up their attacks both in ninjutsu and kenjutsu. The Sannin had already killed at least 2 but was being pushed back by their teamwork. Kakashi came back to his own fight when he heard a familiar sound. Loud chirping birds filled the air and he lunged out of the way as a clone charged him with his own lightning technique emanating from the hand of its outstretched arm. How the hell? He questioned as he had only just taught Sasuke the jutsu a few months ago and no one else knew it. The clone turned and continued to attack Kakashi as he dodged with the aid of his Sharingan. Niji's frown deepened as the clone, or possibly original, continued to prolong the fight. He was unable to even graze the clone with his jukin and nearly lost his hand or even part of his arm to the sword. The clone just kept smiling at him from under the hood despite neither being able to get a hit on the other. It was infuriating to him that a weaker version of the original was managing to hold him off. He had seen several of them die and erupt in smoke from a single hit, yet he couldn't get that single hit. "You're only prolonging the inevitable," stated Niji, but the clone's smile only widened, which made him even more frustrated. Given the clone's chakra reserves, he would actually run out of chakra before the clone did. Pulling back, he waited until the clone came at him and began building chakra, then pushed it out of his body and began spinning. Kaiten. The clone was caught in the initial chakra before the spinning began and dropping its sword. However, it quickly went through a single hand seal. Right as Niji began spinning, the clone's hands began glowing. As Niji spun, he began feeling a chakra drain that was more than he knew it should have been. Despite his fast spinning, his eyes were able to pick up what was happening. "He's draining my chakra," he realized, and began to stop his technique to prevent himself from losing all of his chakra. The Kaiten was not able to destroy the clone as the technique's loss of stability due to the chakra being drained from it wasn't allowing it to have the desired effect against the clone. Niji was in the process of stopping his spin when he felt his arm grabbed by the clone. He was about to retaliate when he felt an even larger drain on his chakra. His Jukin strike was intercepted by the clone's other hand and the drain was doubled. He tried to fight back but soon collapsed to his knees, and then his corners of vision began going dark as the rest of his vision blurred. As the last amount of his chakra was being drained, he felt the clone drop him. He was losing consciousness, and only managed to see a flash green as he fell to the ground. Rock Lee stopped in front of his downed partner and stared down his newest opponent. He had only just been able to defeat the clone he was fighting and turned to find Niji being defeated. That was not something he thought he would ever see. "You're not bad. Do you only specialize in taijutsu?" asked the clone as it took one of the stances of Terraskasi. It had only just received the memories of its fellow clone before dodging the attack by the new opponent. "I cannot use ninjutsu or genjutsu," stated Rock Lee as he adopted the stance of his style of taijutsu. He wasn't sure why, but despite all the teamwork training that Dai-sensei had given them, Niji and Tenten had been extremely aggressive and had put aside teamwork to each engage the clones. "I see," stated the clone and looked to the dropped sword but decided not to go for it. The green boy obviously wanted revenge over what happened to his sensei, and he wanted a good fight. The original had fought many ninja before but not one that specialized in taijutsu. Both teens charged forward, began a new fight. Tenten was blown back by the powerful wind jutsu and grit her teeth as memories of the Chunin exam preliminaries flooded back to her. She quickly realized, however, that she wasn't going to land on the plateau, but was headed right off the edge. She wanted to scream, but the wind jutsu had hit her hard and knocked all the air out of her lungs. As her body dropped and continued moving horizontally, she ran out of surface and was now beginning to fall to the valley below. Her fall, however, was stopped when her entire body jolted to a stop. Looking around, she found white hair wrapped around her foot. The hair pulled her up over the edge of the plateau and deposited her back on the ground. Looking up, she found Jiraiya fighting with 3 clones. Several other parts of his hair had lengthened, and he was trying to capture the cloaked blondes. Jiraiya didn't look at her but said, "Help your teammate and then go to Kurenai," he said as he dodged a sword that had visible chakra on its length. The Toad Sannin went through some hand seals, slammed his hand into the ground, and summoned a fleshy pod around the clones and himself. Tenten frowned but ran to help Lee. She could see that it was foolish of her and Niji to go after the clones on their own, and they were just becoming liabilities. Her mood quickly changed when she saw a sword sticking out of the ground near where Lee was battling. She knew it likely wasn't the real one, but she would still get to wield it in battle, at least for a short period of time. Everything had been going well for Team 8, that is until the clones figured out Kurenai's genjutsu range. Every genjutsu user had an effective range at which they could latch on to a person's chakra system and exploit their senses. Hers was roughly 15 meters, and now the clones were staying well away from her. She had been able to take down quite a few before they figured it out. She would use genjutsu to temporarily paralyze the clones, and Shino or Kiba would finish them off with their jutsu. Hinata was still using her Byakugan to see all the threats at once, as there were at least 4 clones facing off against them. A few clones had already attempted to go through the ground to get at them, but Hinata had alerted them in time. Now they were at a standoff. From the distance the clones were standing at, they would need to use a high-ranking ninjutsu to attack her team. She knew the boy could use ninjutsu like that though, and couldn't believe just how many chakra natures she had seen from the boy. Lightning, wind, water, and earth, she recalled, and wasn't sure what to expect next. She contemplated going on the offensive, but the clones were smart, and when she pressed forward, they would back off. The clones seemed more interested in wearing them out than moving in for a kill. Despite the distance between them, her team was at a disadvantage. They lacked long-distance jutsu. Only Shino and his insects could really reach Naruto without any risk, but the boy's insects hadn't been faring well against the ninjutsu that the clones possessed. The 4 clones backed off and regrouped as memories of Jiraiya, Kakashi, and the 2 genin finishing off the other clones flooded their minds. With the real Naruto focusing on the ship, only one of the clones had diminished force powers. The rest were only using chakra. The 4 remaining clones stood at a distance from the tired group of Konoha ninja. Kakashi had only narrowly avoided injury, and Tenten helped Lee finish off the clone he was fighting. Niji was the only member of the group that was unconscious, but the genin were getting tired and running low on chakra. The lead clone had been the least active in the fighting, and now waited for orders from the original. He could provide more time by having a conversation with his opponents, but that also ran the risk of a sneak attack or perhaps himself getting angry. He knew the original didn't want to admit what information had been taken or learned from Jiraiya, and talking about that information that could cause the clone or the original to lose control over their emotions and invite an opportunity for the QB to surface. Only a few seconds went by as instructions were passed from the original to the 4 remaining clones. Without any words being spoken or any signaling of any kind, one of the clones began quickly going through a few hand seals, slamming its hand into the ground. Only Jiraiya wasn't caught by surprise when a swamp formed beneath the group and they began sinking. Jiraiya put the required amount of chakra into his feet, and managed to keep above the surface of the swamp. He went through several hand seals at the same time that another one of the clones did. Jiraiya's hair began extending into multiple strands that began wrapping around the trapped ninja as one of the clones finished its jutsu, Futon, Shinku Renpa, wind release, vacuum serial waves. Multiple blades of wind were sent at the group of ninja as Jiraiya's hair pulled them out and moved them at different heights and positions to prevent them from harm. Only a few strands of his hair were cut by the sharp wind jutsu while the members of the group remained safe. Continuing the technique, Jiraiya began trying to move them out of the swampy area. Frowning at the display, the force-using clone stood still while small eruptions of smoke came from two of the clones, and the last clone began going through seals. He would attempt to use his fellow clones' disc blades to try and get hits on the still trapped ninja while one of them used ninjutsu. The group, however, was stopped as thick, moving branches of wood came out of the ground beneath them. The forest clone managed to get away, but the other three didn't. The clone looked toward the source of the jutsus and found another Konoha ninja that had managed to stay outside his diminished sensory range. Yamato grit his teeth as making the hand seals necessary for the jutsu had aggravated his shoulder injury. He had stayed back during the fighting to act as an emergency backup just in case, and it appeared that the group definitely needed it. The clone again waited for further orders on the new development, and then took out the vial that it had been given when it was first created by the original. Using a henge, the clone turned into Kabuto. Smearing the blood on its hands, it went through 5 hand seals, then slammed its hands into the ground and said Kichios no Jutsu, summoning technique, and a large area was covered with smoke. Using Kabuto's voice, the clone commanded the summonings to attack while it ran back to the entrance of the bunker. 3 largest snakes emerged from the smoke and began attacking the Konoha ninja. The Konoha ninja don't appear to be doing that well, commented the black half of the plant Akatsuki. I'm not sure what the Jinchuriki is up to. Attacking with clones and then retreating doesn't seem like a very good strategy, commented the white half. Their mission was basically to monitor the Jinchuriki. They weren't to engage and hadn't actually been able to get near the container's base as the group possessed a very good sensor ninja and they were ordered not to be spotted by anyone. Currently they were partially exposed from the side of a nearby mountain but had a good vantage point. Getting any closer to the underground area would put them in danger of being discovered by one of the Hyuga or someone else in the fighting group below. It was bad enough that they had to travel to the isolated island. Moving anywhere in the elemental countries was easy, but they couldn't travel across water the way they could land, especially not salt water. Do you think they'll be able to capture it? Questioned the white half, and its other half quickly responded, if they don't, we'll have to follow it wherever it goes. How's everything going? Inquired Kabuto to the cloaked figure sitting in a meditative position in one of the chairs of the cockpit. They're still on the surface and now fighting a few summonings. As for the ship, it's still not working correctly, the cloaked Naruto stated as he kept his eyes closed and focused on his other tasks. How long do we have until they are here? The cloak-wearing Kabuto inquired. I'm not sure. My clone will hold them off in the tunnels for as long as it can. Given that one Hyuga is still conscious, it won't be long before at least part of their group finds us, he stated and kept his anger in check. The dojutsu the clan possessed was now proving to be more annoying than ever. And when that happens? We don't take prisoners and can't leave them alive, answered Naruto, and Kabuto just chuckled as he walked out of the cockpit and back down the ship's main hallway to the other members of the group. If the ninja from Konoha made it to the ship before they left, then they would all have to fight. Naruto wanted to leave before it came to that, but he recognized that it could still happen. He just hoped that his Sith runes were preventing the ship from being seen by the Hyuga, or at least preventing it from being viewed clearly. He had put quite a few different sets of runes in the hangar bay. At least one of them should render the viewers unable to clearly make out what was in the room. He calmly breathed in and checked on his clones and Master Plagueis' progress. It still seemed that something was wrong, but no clear sign as to what. Opening his eyes, he called Karen to him. His sensing range wasn't far enough to figure out where the intruders were, and he needed her help to better plan out a defense strategy. It was still possible that at least one of the ninja would use an earth jutsu to move through the rock, and he wanted to know if that was happening. Jiraiya studied the entrance from afar and sent in one of his toads to check it out for him. He was still wary of traps and wanted to be absolutely sure before proceeding. The snakes hadn't been hard to defeat once he summoned one of his large toads. Niji wouldn't be going with them and Yamato would be staying on the surface to look after the Hyuga genin. Jiraiya looked to his right and found the other Hyuga that was present in the group. According to her information, they were about to walk into a large and complex labyrinth of tunnels that ultimately led down deeper into the ground and to what looked like a base. She described the rooms to him, and he found the last one she described the most interesting. Despite her dojutsu, Hinata had not been able to tell him what was in the lowest and largest room. She could only tell him that the room appeared to be blurred in her vision. That had definitely caught his attention. He couldn't image what could be blurring the girl's vision in that particular room, but the fact that it was happening made it obvious that the large room was where they should be going. The single tunnel split into 3 and then went into a maze of different tunnels that led both away and into each other. The result was several different ways that led to where he wanted to go. However, she also told them about the long, very wide escape tunnel that had been created for the large room. Ideally, Jiraiya would have wanted to send Ninja to the other tunnel and prevent Naruto from escaping, but it was on the other side of a nearby mountain and would take too long. The quickest course of action was to use the girl to quickly get through the maze, but something told him it would be far from easy. He understood that Naruto could just use the other tunnel and escape, while perhaps using explosives to collapse the tunnel system, but something about that thought didn't sit right. Despite Akatsuki coming after him and Konoha ninja coming to the island, Naruto was still there. The fact that Naruto was stalling them, had created an elaborate tunnel system, hadn't left the island, and had gone to a great deal of trouble to hide something from a Hyuga's dojutsu was not lost on him. Something was down there that Naruto was after. He had no idea what it was, but he did know it was something that the boy wanted to keep a secret, and if they got there fast enough, he would find out what it was and capture Naruto in the process. The toad quickly returned and told them that the entryway didn't have any traps. Jiraiya decided to keep the toad with him for the journey, as he knew they might be needing him again. "Tell me when they reached the split in the tunnel," Naruto asked of the nearby Karen. They were both sitting in 2 of the 4 chairs in the cockpit. He was concentrating on his clones while she concentrated on her sensing. Once the Konoha ninja reached the split in the tunnels, he would set his trap. The goal was to create enough confusion to split the group up and keep them from finding each other. Obviously, the group with the Hyuga would be the most well off, but that group would have to decide whether to take the time to gather the others or to keep moving forward. Either choice would give him and his group the advantage, as they either got more time or few opponents to face. "They're nearing the area," stated Karen, and Naruto focused his thoughts on the explosive tags he had placed. He wasn't a novice when it came to traps, and rather than setting or hiding the tags on the surface, he actually embedded them into the rock. The goal was to prevent the tags from being heard when the armed and seen when intruders entered. Strategically placing the tags in groups, he could set off one grouping at a time and herd the ninja to the split in the tunnels, hopefully forcing them in the confusing to split up. "Now," stated Karen, and Naruto quickly put his hands into the hand seal for activating the explosive notes. Each member of the group noted the steady downward slope of the tunnel as they continued along its path. The tunnel was partially illuminated for them, and the ones at the front of the group could see a room coming up ahead. From what Hinata described, it would have 3 tunnels that they could take. She found the quickest route to be the middle tunnel, along with a few twists and turns after that. Once they entered the room, the Jonin took note of the slightly different ceiling but didn't think anything of it. As they moved to the center tunnel, an explosion behind them shook the ground. Every member of the group turned and saw one explosion after another coming from the hallway they had just traveled down. Jiraiya turned to make his way to the center tunnel in the hopes of outrunning the explosions when his instincts told him something else was wrong. A second later, pieces of the ceiling began breaking apart and fall down upon them. 2 very long but narrow segments of ceiling began falling. The Jonin only had a split second to react. Kurenai grabbed 2 of her students, which were the closest to her, while Kakashi grabbed the 2 students he was looking after. The stones effectively separated the ninja into 3 groups, with Hinata and Jiraiya in the middle. No member of the group, however, had time to break through the walls and rejoin with the others as the explosions got closer and closer. Each ninja group ran to the tunnel they were herded into as the explosions destroyed the room they had just been in and sealed them into the tunnels. Damn it! I didn't even notice a trap, thought Jiraiya as he looked behind to find that the explosions had stopped and debris covered the way they had just come from. He gave a quick glance at the Hyuga girl to see if she was alright and then thought about what he should do. He needed to get to the concealed room as soon as possible. It was evident that he would be putting the other ninja at risk and even himself in greater danger, but he had to get there as fast as possible. Did they split up like I wanted? Asked Naruto, and Karen responded that they had. The Hyuga was left with the largest chakra signature of the group, which Naruto knew to be Jiraiya. The pair were also moving fast and right at them. It wasn't exactly what he wanted, but it split up the group. He had hoped it wouldn't be Jiraiya that he had to face, but he did have advantages. From reading the man's mind before the Chunin exam finals, he knew what Jiraiya was capable of and what jutsu the Toad Sannin used the most frequently. It was only a matter of time before the duo reached the hangar bay, even with his clones still in the maze. Tell me when they get near our location, ordered Naruto, and Karen acknowledged as she monitored the ninja moving above them. Jiraiya ended up carrying Hinata under his arm as they raced through the underground system. They encountered quite a few traps, but they either managed to evade them with the Byakugan or Jiraiya quickly blasted through them. Steadily they made their way deeper underground and towards their final objective. They had a run-in with the remaining clone, but Jiraiya was able to defeat it without much difficulty. The closer they got to the end of the tunnels, the clearer the image of the room became to Hinata. She couldn't identify what she was seeing but could see several chakra signatures, and it was enough that she could identify several of them as Naruto's. The signatures were all in close proximity and didn't seem to be going anywhere. Just a little farther, Jiraiya thought, as he would finally be able to make up for his mistakes in the past and bring Naruto back to the village to prevent Akatsuki from getting their hands on him. I have no fucking clue what is wrong with the damn engines, Naruto admitted to himself. His clones had been over the engines multiple times from inside and outside the ship. There was nothing wrong. For some reason his controls in the cockpit just weren't registering any power going to the engines, or the engines as even being operational. The engines were on, but he just couldn't do anything because the controls were all in the cockpit. He couldn't pilot the ship from the engine room. The clones had checked the cockpit as well but found nothing wrong there either. Karen had also just informed him that the pair of Jiraiya and the Hyuga girl was nearly upon them. He knew how strong Jiraiya was. The man could probably fight both Itachi and Kisame at the same time, and possibly win. Even with everyone he had, Jiraiya would still have reinforcements eventually arriving. The ship could also get damaged in the fight. Not that it really matters, he thought derisively, as the ship was basically worthless to them at that point. Breaking his meditation, he stood from his chair and began checking his gear. It was at that moment that Suigetsu walked in. Naruto could feel the Kiri ninja coming in to ask a varied version of "Are we taking off yet?" which he had already heard many times from the very vocal Taiyuya. "So, what's taking so long?" questioned Suigetsu, and Naruto rolled his eyes. "As you can see on the instrumentation behind you, nothing is lighting up because the engines aren't working properly. Or something is wrong. I haven't been able to find the problem, and it looks like..." However, Naruto was cut off as Suigetsu's attention moved to the panel, and the white-haired teen smacked it with his fist. The lights and instrumentation immediately came on, followed by the sounds of the engines and other associated systems completing their warm-up period. "You've got to be fucking kidding me. All I had to do was punch the damn thing," Naruto thought as he looked confoundedly to the instrumentation in the pilot's seats and found the ship now working perfectly. "I guess it just needed the old Kiri touch." Suigetsu commented on his success and strapped into one of the 4 chairs. "They really are a violent village," Karen inwardly commented before she realized that the 2 ninjas she was focusing on had just arrived. Naruto jumped in the pilot's seat and began flicking switches to get the ship out of there as fast as possible. The landing struts came up, and as the repulsor lifts activated and the ship idled forward until Naruto began adding power to the engines. Looking out the cockpit window, he said with a smirk to the others in the seats with him, "Everyone wave bye to the Sannin." Jiraiya and Hinata made it to the large room and stood silently as they stared at the object before them. It was made entirely of metal, or what they thought was metal, and took up most of the space in the room. "What the hell is that?" Jiraiya wondered as he looked over the device. Suddenly it began making noise, and then 4 long ski-like pieces began moving from the floor and fit inside the vehicle perfectly, leaving little evidence of them ever sticking out. "It's floating in the air," he noted out loud, and the two watched as it began moving away and towards the tunnel. Jiraiya came out of his stupor and saw 3 people in the front windows. The object. He instantly recognized one as Naruto and the other as the grass ninja Karen, but couldn't identify the third. They were all waving at him. The slow forward movement of the vehicle ended as it began accelerating forward. Jiraiya stared at the 3 large glowing lights that were at the end of the vehicle and finally realized it was leaving. Grabbing Hinata, he raced to the large tunnel and after the escaping Jinchuriki. Running after it, he was soon left behind as its speed only kept increasing. Hinata examined every part of the vehicle with her dojutsu as she was hefted under one of Jiraiya's arms and carried with the man. It was so complex and full of different things that she couldn't identify. She could tell it was meant to be lived in from the rooms she could see, but other than that, she had no idea what it was. Her eyes never left it, even as it got farther and farther down the tunnel. Naruto kept the ship steady as it moved down the corridor and to the exit. He had created the long tunnel so that the ship could take off as unseen as possible. The tunnel exited in a valley and he could fly to the ocean without being seen by any of the inhabitants of the island. He checked through all the systems as he felt Master Plagueis come to the front of the ship. The body of Gato entered the cockpit and sat down in the other pilot's seat. "You found out what was wrong?" Plagueis asked through a telepathic link to Naruto. "No, not exactly," he responded, and Plagueis could glean some of the details from his student's embarrassed mind. Only the slight semblance of a frown was the response to the new information. He knew sometimes ships were just temperamental like that, especially ones that were heavily modified and repaired by the owner. The ship exited the tunnel and cruised through the valley and then over the ocean. They would travel a minute or so away from the country before climbing vertically and leaving the atmosphere of the planet. Eventually they were far enough away to avoid being seen, and Naruto began the ship's ascent. The others on board soon crowded the cockpit as they passed through the clouds and climbed higher in the planet's atmosphere. They watched as the atmosphere became thinner and thinner until it faded into an endless landscape dotted with more small lights from stars and planets than they could count and had ever seen from the surface. No words were exchanged as every person but Plagueis viewed space for the first time. They had been told all about it, but seeing it was very different. The ship traveled a short distance from the planet and achieved orbit before Naruto began altering course. They would take the exact same path the ship had taken to get to their planet, and began their journey back to the known galaxy at the exact point the ship exited hyperspace in the system. It would take a short time before they reached that part of their solar system, so they would get to see a few more sights. As the ship turned, part of the planet they used to live on came into view. Everyone was staring at it until Naruto glanced over at the moon and felt something coming from it. He had never felt such a dark presence before, but it seemed to be radiating from the small moon. He looked over at Plagueis, who also was not sure why the moon felt as it did, and then altered course to take them away from the oddity that orbited the planet. If he was honest with himself, the moon scared him, and yet he also felt drawn to it. While he was curious about it, he was also smart enough to know that he should stay away from it and never venture there. Jiraiya made it to the end of the tunnel, and Hinata had just managed to make out the flying machine in the distance. She told him it just kept climbing in the air until she couldn't see it anymore, and although she strained her eyes to get any last glimpses, it was just too far. The pair stared at the sky as either could really believe or completely fathom what they had just seen. One thing, however, was certain. Once they got back to the village, they would be having a long debriefing with the Hokage. This part of the mission certainly wasn't going on any report. Tsunade's going to chew me out for failing, and I'm not even sure if she will believe me about this part of the story. At least I have a witness. Jiraiya thought, and put his hand on the young girl's shoulder to let her know that they should get going. He had no idea where Naruto was going. He just didn't have the information to put theories together or say anything for certain. Speculations were the best that he could come up with, and even then, they seemed rather impossible and outlandish. The ship continued on as they traveled to the edge of the solar system to enter hyperspace, exactly where the ship had left hyperspace nearly a decade previously. Plagueyes had already put the coordinates into the navigational computer after removing the lockout that had been engaged at some point before the ship crashed. All that was left was to reach the designated spot and then make the preparations for the jump. Shivers had been going down Naruto's spine since the ship started up and began moving in the hangar bay. The feeling still hadn't stopped. Most would have seen an empty vacuum, but that was not what he saw. The controls at his fingertips could take him anywhere he wanted, though he knew he had to go to a specific planet given the available navigational data, but in theory they could take him anywhere. Just that knowledge made a burden seem to lift off his shoulders. He saw a freedom in the empty vacuum that few others saw. The ship didn't seem like a confined space but more of an unmarked slate that he could write on. No one in the galaxy had any idea what a Jinchuriki was, or knew who the hell Uzumaki Naruto was, nor would they even give a damn. If he received looks of contempt, they would be because he actually did something malicious to deserve those looks, not simply because he existed. Searching his feelings, he found for the first time, in a long time, that he was actually happy, possibly even giddy with excitement which hadn't happened in years. Until that moment he wasn't actually sure he could still experience such strong positive emotions. In just a week's time he would travel out of the unknown and into the known, leaving where he felt he didn't belong, to where he felt he did. Chapter 19. 36.4 BBY, current year. Sitting in the pilot's seat, twin blue orbs stared into the blue hyperspace corridor as the ship moved through the alternate dimension towards its destination. Plagueyes had told him not to look at it, but he hadn't listened. Just the thought that they would be arriving at an outer rim planet the following day was making him anxious, and he hadn't been able to sleep. Staring at the blue moving shapes was calming, and even if Plagueyes told him prolonged staring at the corridor could cause hyperrapture, which was a form of madness, he didn't really care. He's been staring at it for hours at a time during the course of their trip, so he felt he was probably safe from it. Their journey from the Ibanez system, which was what someone in the group began naming the solar system that had their home planet, would take approximately 7 days, and they had already been traveling for over 6. Ibanez was also now the name of their planet, and was basically Shinobi spelled backwards. He couldn't remember who came up with it, but the name had caught on with the ninja on board. Plagueyes stated that he didn't really care, and so it became official. During their travel time, Naruto had spent most of it learning the basics of instinctive astrogation from Plagueyes. It was a force technique that allowed a force user to determine a fast and safe route through hyperspace without the need of a navigational computer, astromech droid, or up-to-date star charts. Though it was just an introduction and the basics of the technique, Plagueyes commented that he seemed to have a knack for it. He had also gotten a chance to look over the chakra armor devices which he had been aware of but hadn't had any time to look at while in Snow Country. He spent nearly a whole day examining the device, its design, and making plans for what he could do with it. Ideally, what he wanted was to modify it to protect those of his group. Absorbing ninjutsu was not something that they need, but blaster fire and other projectile weapons were one of the most serious concerns for them in the galaxy. They may be much stronger, faster, and more powerful than most other beings in the galaxy, but that didn't mean that a simple weapon couldn't kill them just like it could everyone else. The attack could even come from a distance or be the result of shrapnel. His chosen style of lightsaber combat, Form 4 Naimen, also wasn't well suited for deflecting or protecting himself from blaster bolts. His ninjato could deflect them, he was sure of that, but learning to use it to deflect incoming blaster bolts was something he needed to work on when he got a chance. It would also be nice to have a shielding device that could protect him if an attack got through. So far, most of the group had adjusted to space travel and being stuck in a confined space. The only person that was very uncomfortable with it was Karen, and it wasn't because of the ship or claustrophobia. Given her incredible chakra sensing abilities, the redhead was having difficulty coping. Even if she wasn't actively sensing around her, he could tell that the loss of surroundings had greatly affected her. Going from an area where chakra was all around her, to basically an empty void with only a few chakra signatures near her was not easy. The entire trip she had been not sleeping, quickly angered and generally irritable. He actually ended up having the medical droid sedate Karen so she could get some uninterrupted sleep and to calm her down. A loopy Karen was much preferred to an angry Karen. Luckily, most of Karen's frustrations had been taken out on Sujetsu, whom she couldn't actually hurt physically. Several days into their journey, Karen had stormed into his room and demanded he teach her lightning jutsu so that she could hurt Sujetsu. He agreed, though her frustration only increased upon not being able to grasp lightning jutsu as fast as she wanted to. Her primary element turned out to be earth, and therefore she would have some difficulty learning the lightning element, similar to how he had difficulty learning the fire element. The only other person that seemed to be affected was Taiya. It wasn't hard to notice her glaring at him all the time, but that wasn't necessarily a new development. Picking up his nearby datapad, he looked over the information that they had on the planet they were traveling to. In just a little while he would be giving a small debriefing on the planet and their objectives while there. "What do you mean he's gone?" questioned Tsunade in a deadly voice as she looked at the only other person in the room. The team she sent on the very first mission she assigned as Hokage had just returned with news of failure, and she wanted answers from her former teammate. "Tsunadeheim, it really wasn't my fault," Jiraiya said in a placating manner and whimpered under the glare she gave him. He then dodged the pen she threw at him, which deeply embedded into the wall behind him. "I took this stupid job because you had to find the runaway Jinchuriki, and now you're telling me that there is no way to actually get him back?" "He flew away on a flying machine," Jiraiya explained with exasperation. "So? Go after him, he can't have gotten that far," the Hokage countered. They had encountered flying devices before during battles with ninja from Sky Country, so it wasn't a huge shock that the boy had gotten his hands on a flying machine. Jiraiya sighed and thought for a moment about the best possible description of what happened that he could give her. He didn't just fly away. He flew straight up, vertically, and the machine didn't show any signs of slowing down. In fact, from what Hinata-san tells me, the flying machine actually sped up to incredible speeds that I've never seen before. It didn't resemble anything I remember seeing from Sky Country. I also didn't feel any chakra coming off it, and she didn't see any chakra coming from the devices that were keeping it aloft. Tsunade's anger waned slightly as she thought about the information. They had both fought with Sky Country ninja and knew how powerful flying machines and the technology from that country was. It was the main reason why Konoha had gone so far to wipe out the technology, and the ninja that used it in that hidden village. Now Jiraiya was telling her about something different and more advanced that the Jinchuriki had gotten his hands on, and she still needed clarification on something. "What do you mean it flew straight up? It didn't just gain some altitude and then continue on its way?" she questioned. Hinata-san said it just kept going straight up with no sign of stopping, Jiraiya reiterated for the Hokage. "Where the hell would he be going?" she asked. "I just don't know," was the reply of the Toad Sannin. "What about the scientists, did you get anything from them?" inquired the Hokage as she continued to search for answers. "That really isn't something we should press Spring Country for," responded Jiraiya as he tried to dodge the question. "Why not?" Tsunade asked irritably. "Well, in destroying the castle that Doto used, the scientists may not have gotten out of the castle in time, and whatever they were working on was destroyed." "How bad?" she asked, almost not wanting an answer. "A good portion are dead or missing, and whatever they were working on is trashed. The ones that are alive are less than happy to see and won't say a word." "How did that happen?" Tsunade demanded. "I'm told it was a big explosion." "Shizen!" yelled the Hokage as she requested the presence of her assistant. "Hi, Tsunade-sama," responded Shizuin as she partially opened the door and poked her head in. "Tell Hatake Kakashi that he's on gate duty for the next 2 weeks," commanded the Godame, and Shizen acknowledged the order as she went to find a messenger. "What about that huge hideout I read about in the report? Was anything there or left behind?" asked Tsunade. "Nothing. Whatever was there had been completely cleared out. No scrolls, no weapons, and nothing left behind to tell me anything about where they might be going. He covered his tracks well." "Don't compliment him, you idiot. This is all your fault," she accused and downed the sake in her saucer. Jiraiya sighed and didn't respond or contest her accusation. He got up and left through the door, which she knew was rather odd for him as he usually left through the window. Seeing the face of her former teammate as he turned and left, Tsunade regretted her words. Maybe we're both just screw-ups, she thought and poured herself another drink. A fly-trap-like creature emerged from the ground and opened the plant part to reveal a split dual-colored body. Both eyes looked to the person standing nearby and looking over the main city in aim. Did the Konoha ninja capture the Kyuubi Jinchuriki? Questioned Pain without looking at the newcomer in the room. I'm afraid not, answered a hesitant white half. Pain's head turned and he glanced at Zetsu but then turned back to the view of the city. And the container's current whereabouts? Unknown, stated the black half, and Pain's head turned much faster than before to glare at the Akatsuki member with his dojutsu. You lost him? Pain questioned, and both halves could feel the anger in their leader's voice. Not exactly, began the white half, and the black half continued the sentence. He managed to escape in some kind of flying machine before we could implement any means to track him. The Jinchuriki never left the area where the device was kept, and we couldn't sneak in or get close to it without being spotted, explained the white half. Which direction did the container head in? Back to the elemental countries? Questioned the leader of Akatsuki. No, said the white half, and Pain's glare prompted the darker half to fill in the details. He headed straight out to sea with his group and not towards any land masses. He was outside of our range in seconds. He was moving too fast across the water for us to get a good look at the device, added the white half in its defense, and the darker half also chimed in. By the time we got to the coast, he was already miles away from the island and we couldn't even see the machine he was flying in. So we have no idea where it might be going, stated Pain, and Zetsu only nodded. This will make things difficult when the time comes to capture them all. We only found him because of Sasori's spy. Is the spy still alive? Questioned Pain, and Zetsu nodded again. Pain thought about the situation but did not voice any of his thoughts. It didn't make sense that Sasori's spy would have called them into an ambush, but that was what Itachi and Kisame reported. Why give up a hidden position when they didn't even know the container was in Snow Country? He wondered and thought that perhaps the spy was still on their side. In any case, they would now have to put more resources into finding the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The transportation was a poor choice by the Jinchuriki's part, as a flying machine was very rare and it would likely be spotted and talked about. Word would eventually reach them and they would find out where the Jinchuriki fled to. With no further conversation on the part of their leader, both halves took the silence as their cue to exit. Naruto walked to the rounded table and sat down in his seat. Playguys was already seated and the rest of the group sat around him. Dimming the lights, he activated the holo projector in the center of the table and brought up the file on the planet that they were headed for. In less than 2 hours we will be arriving at the first planet on the fringes of the outer rim in the known galaxy. This planet is referred to on star charts as Cuna's Tail 3 of the Cuna's Tail system. For those that travel or live on the planet, it is known by another name, Saifer. The planet experiences a phenomenon known as tidal locking. This means that the planet no longer rotates around its axis. Half of the planet is therefore always in direct sunlight and scorched by the sun, while the other half is always in the dark and practically frozen. Both halves are essentially wastes, but there is a vertical belt between the halves where the conditions are habitable. It is along this belt where the planet's estimated 150,000 inhabitants live, clustered around 3 makeshift spaceports. The inhabitants that don't live on the planet are smugglers, gunrunners, thieves, pirates, and other unscrupulous individuals, so we shouldn't have a problem fitting in. Naruto finished as the group looked at the holographic planet and listened to his speech. What exactly are our goals on Saifer? Kabuto chimed in and Naruto answered, the ship needs to be replaced. It would be extremely dangerous to keep using it as my hull repairs were only temporary. Since we don't have the money to buy a new ship, we can sell this one at a junkyard and then steal a ship. Because the planet is frequented by so many unsavory groups, we also might be able to add to our cargo. We currently have several cases of smuggled weapons, and the more we acquire, the more money we can get later. We should also think about finding out as much information as possible about the planet without drawing much attention to ourselves. Naruto added. I get it, stated Sujetsu, so we should burst a few heads and cut off a few legs. I believe he was referring to more subtle means of information gathering, which I would be happy to take care of, offered Kabuto. Given so many years of being a spy, the white-haired Sith spawn was well versed in information gathering. Yes, you will initially be going with Master Playguys to gather information. The rest of us will be keeping a low profile until we learn more. Individuals our age in the galaxy aren't considered adults, so a bunch of kids walking around on such a planet would draw a lot of attention. Any other questions? He asked and looked around the table while turning off the holo projector and turning back on the lights. What types of weird species will we encounter? Asked Tayuya as she sat with her arms crossed and looking directly at Naruto. Naruto deferred to Playguys as he actually wasn't sure what species they would encounter given that detailed knowledge of the planet was unknown to him. Humans would likely be the majority of the inhabitants, followed by Nikto, Vashans, and perhaps species like Duros, Twi'leks, and Celestins in addition to others. Playguys surmised. Having also never been to Saifer, he could only guess at some of the species that they might see. A brief moment elapsed, and there were no more questions. With the meeting over, the group dispersed without another word as they each went to prepare. Playguys guided the ship into one of the open circular hangar bays at one of the 3 spaceports on the planet. He had chosen the spaceport based upon what the Force was telling him. Once the ship came to a landing, he and Kabuto made their way to the ship's landing ramp. The plan was for both of them to venture out with one of the demon brothers and carry out some needed business. He wanted Naruto to keep an eye on the ship until arrangements could be made. Seeing different species for the first time could be a very shocking experience, and the last thing he wanted was for some of the group to gawk at every non-human they passed. In some of the seediest locations in the galaxy, all one had to do was look at or stare at a person the wrong way for a fight to start or for blasters to be drawn. It was best to let the group stay at the landing port with the ship and get a glance at different species from afar before getting a closer look. They would first head to a local junkyard in order to sell their ship. Likely he wouldn't be able to get any credits as Saifer was so far away from the Republic that credits weren't used as normal currency or accepted. He hoped to instead get Nova crystals as they were widely accepted in most places around the entire galaxy. Given that their ship was used, damaged, and had a makeshift power source, he knew he wouldn't be able to get much for it. Barton knew the ship was likely around 75,000 credits, but their ship would only be worth a fraction of that amount. He'd be lucky to get 10,000, but with a little persuasion, he felt he could get that price or more. He could ask for and get an unreasonable price, but he didn't want to draw any attention to them. There was no telling how long they would be on the planet. Being cautious was what preserved him thus far, and he wasn't about to risk anything. There would be plenty of opportunities to gather wealth later on. The cargo they had would be worth far more than that amount of credits. Each weapon was nearly worth 1,000 credits, and they had several crates of rifles and pistols. The only problem was that Saifer was merely a stopping point. Weapons weren't commonly sold there, and it would be more dangerous to try and unload their cargo than to keep it safe and wait to sell it later. Walking down the landing ramp, the group of 3 were greeted by several well-armed individuals. The port was probably owned by some thug or criminal, and they would have to pay an exorbitant tax to land there, even if it was only for a short period. However, landing outside the spaceport might only put them at a higher risk of their ship being stolen, in addition to other possibilities. Reaching the bottom of the ramp, they were partially surrounded by 4 individuals. All 4 were human and trying to look as intimidating as possible. Searching their minds, he found out what would be in store for them later and informed Naruto through their link. "This is our port, and you're going to have to pay to keep your ship here. There's a charge for staying and a protection fee. We also can't guarantee that your ship will be safe," stated one of the group in Galactic Basic, and the others all chuckled. "That will be fine, however, we've already paid for the day. You should go bother someone else," Playguys stated while waving Gata's hand. The eyes of the 4 humans became unfocused for a second, and the leader responded, "You've already paid for the day, we'll go bother someone else." With that, the 4 left. "That's quite a useful trick," commented Kabuto, as it was the first time he had seen such a technique from the short man. "Only on the weak-minded," explained Playguys, and with that they headed out. On the ship, Naruto began deleting the ship's logs and navigational data. Earlier he had copied all the ship's navigational charts onto a datacard. There was now only a single copy of the information on their home planet, and it was inside a storage seal on his arm. Plagueyes had informed him that they would likely be visited by guests, and that he should make sure that the ship cannot be traced to its previous destination. Deleting all the other records would prevent anyone from being able to figure out anything about them and what they might be carrying. A common trick at some spaceports was to hack, into the ships to find out where they were traveling from, how many were aboard, and what the cargo was. Based upon that information, someone may decide to try and board the ship in order to capture it or steal the cargo. Even if the ship was somehow sliced from outside, Plagueyes wanted to make sure that nothing would be found. The only thing that they couldn't change was the ship's transponder code, which was a signal hidden in the sublight engines used to identify and provide information on a ship. From previous logs, they knew the ship had been to the planet before, but given how long the ship had been lost for, it was unlikely that anyone from the planet would recognize it. Walking down the streets of the spaceport was quite an experience for Kabuto and Gozu. There were numerous small merchants that lined the streets, selling things they had never heard of nor ever seen, and they already passed by several non-humans that were quite unique. Plagueyes had just sold the ship and they were to deliver it that afternoon to a large junkyard that was on the edge of town. The short man was correct about the price and made sure to make special arrangements with the junkyard owner so that they could keep the ship in the yard but still live in it for as long as they needed. They were now apparently heading to one of the local cantina, which were apparently a bar that also featured gambling, music, and other sordid affairs. However, Kabuto's attention was more focused on the things that he'd passed by and not looking for said cantina. So far he had seen at least 5 species that were each very distinctive. He made mental notes about them but wished he had a datapad device that he's seen Naruto using to write down his observations. Even more so, he wished that he could lure a few into back alleys and add their bodies to his corpse scrolls so he could examine them later in detail. Learning from a medical droid just wasn't the same as learning from an actual body that he could dissect. Gozu was also interested in the species, but not nearly as much as the snake-like ninja. His interest was mainly on the few female species he had passed, and seeing how much they were different from human females. Plagueyes and the others came to a stop at a building that was easily identified as a cantina from the writing on the outside. The doors were open but hardly looked inviting. Plagueyes led the group inside, where they passed through several sensing devices, though the others didn't notice this fact. Music was playing as they entered and a variety of smells filled the air. On one side was a band playing as well as several tables with seats containing drunken occupants. The other side of the room had many unique tables where it appeared games of chance were being played. Right in the middle was the bar area. Their group garnered some attention while they walked up to the bar. The cloaked Kabuto was of more interest to some, while Gozu was certainly the most physically intimidating. Getting the attention of the barkeeper, Plagueyes ordered 3 drinks while the others looked around. The music wasn't loud enough to prevent a conversation from being heard, so Plagueyes used a simple force technique to prevent those nearby from hearing him talk with Kabuto and Gozu. "Take a good look around," asked Plagueyes, and the other 2 complied while he didn't take his eyes off his drink. Kabuto's eyes automatically searched for possible sources of information among the members of the group. He believed he saw several illicit deals or negotiations going on and a couple of individuals who might provide information for the right price. Gozu looked around and saw a bunch of drunks in a bar and people gambling. He was confident he could take every one of them. "Those exact thoughts are why I brought each of you. Your role, Kabuto," Plagueyes said while secretly slipping the ninja a portion of the crystals from the sail of the ship, "is to find out as much as you can about the area and who runs this spaceport. Gozu, you will be my backup. No doubt I will have a few people coming after me when we leave." "And what will you be doing?" Gozu questioned while examining the strange drink before him. He didn't like the idea of sitting around and waiting. "I'm going to be trying my luck at cards, and try not to stare at your drink so much, just drink it. It's quite generic and not enough to really get you drunk. The taste shouldn't be too bad." Gozu frowned but downed the drink and found it wasn't bad. Plagueyes tried his own drink and also found the drink unsavory, but quickly realized that it was because he was in a human body. To Immune, the drink he ordered would have tasted quite different. "Do you plan to increase our money?" questioned Kabuto as he nursed his drink and thought the idea of play guys playing cards must have an underlying reason besides the money that was on the table. All I have to do is find a good table with Gunrunners and I can figure out where their crews typically stash caches while on the planet. Leaving weapons aboard a ship is an invite for trouble, and so many Gunrunners have bolt holes to hide their weapons in. It won't take long to gather that information and then I can send out Naruto with the others to secure the weapons and increase our cargo. We might even get a ship out of it, explained Playguys as he scanned the sabacc tables and sensed for possible marks. If you don't mind me asking, why didn't you just send Naruto to come here? I've seen his luck firsthand and I don't think he would have any problem working the tables? Kabuto questioned as he decided upon who he might try to barter information with. He's only 12, and while the fact that he was a ninja made him an adult in the eyes of the people of Ibanez, he would only be considered a child here. They wouldn't take him seriously. Maybe a few of the players would allow it just to take some of his money, but they would kick him out of the cantina if he started winning. That is why I left everyone else at the ship. How many children have you noticed so far when we walked through the spaceport? Playguys questioned and Kabuto understood. Besides Meizu, the three of them were the oldest of the group. Jugo was around 15, Taiya 14, and the rest were not even 13. A large group of oddly dressed kids would draw quite a bit of notice on a planet such as Saifer. Kabuto's thoughts were soon broken by Goza's question, "Can I order something stronger?" he asked as he just finished downing a second drink of what Playguys ordered. "No, I don't want you impaired, and with Naruto's upgrade to you, I have no idea if you can get impaired. I'm going to be making enemies at the table and I need you alert and ready in case they start something at the table. If everything goes according to plan, I'll purchase a bottle of something stronger when we leave." Playguys stated and Gozen nodded but still frowned. Neither he nor his brother were ever patient. Maybe I should have had Meizu come instead of volunteering. He seems to be having more fun. Goza thought as he could feel through whatever link he had with Naruto and his brother that their group was doing something much more interesting than waiting around at a bar. "I didn't do anything strange when I was sedated, did I?" questioned Karen to the group as she sat at the table on the ship. It had only been in the past few hours that said sedative had worn off and she was having trouble remembering all that transpired on the journey. "No, not much happened. Well, there was that one thing that you did, but I don't know if you consider it strange or not," remarked Suigetsu with a smirk. Karen glared at her nemesis and adjusted her glasses as she hesitated to reply. "And what would that be?" questioned a frowning Karen. "Well, you stripped off all your clothes and ran around the ship naked," explained Suigetsu with a shrug, and he had a hard time keeping the smile off his face. "I did no such thing." "Did I?" The others refused to meet her glance, and those with breather masks were thankful that their smiles couldn't be seen. The laughter, however, soon started, and Suigetsu was laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. "You bastard!" she yelled and stood while pulling out her blaster. Blast! Suigetsu's head lost consistency as the plasma bolt pierced it and charred the back of his chair. It soon reformed and the teen rubbed his cheek where the blast had hit him. "That really stinks," he remarked with a glare, but before anything else could happen, Naruto pulled the weapon out of Karen's hand with the force. "Had you been paying attention, Karen, like I asked you to, you would have realized that we have company," he stated and looked to Meizu, who turned into smoke and quickly traveled to the top hatch of the ship. Outside the ship, 5 figures moved into the hangar bay. They were not same ones that Playguys had dealt with earlier, but were of the same group. It was a routine that they practiced when a ship landed in their hangars. They made them pay and then went after the cargo if it seemed good. "Are you sure this is going to be a good score?" questioned one of them. "A ship with no passenger or cargo manifest as well as deleted logs points to a nice score. They could be hauling anything, but whatever it is, it will be a payday for us," one of the others assured the rest. The group approached the newly landed ship and put on their breather masks. It certainly wasn't the first time that they had boarded a ship and stolen its cargo. Seeing as 3 individuals had already left the ship, they were confident that they wouldn't be dealing with that many assailants, and it really didn't matter considering what they planned on using. The 5 figures stealthily moved around the front of the ship and headed for the open landing ramp. They made sure to stay out of sight of the cockpit windows. All they had to do was toss the grenade inside and let the gas distribute throughout the ship and knock out anyone that had stayed on board. The members weren't nearly in position when the sound of a single blaster shot was heard. They each froze where they were and waited, listening. It was obvious that the shot had come from inside the ship, but they were waiting to see if someone would come out. When half a minute went by and nothing happened, the leader of the group gave a signal to move in. "I guess they're just helping us along by killing each other off," he thought, and readied the grenade. Cautiously checking the ramp, he moved to one side and tossed the grenade in. Expecting shouts, or at least the familiar sound of the grenade quickly releasing its contents on impact, he was quite surprised when the same grenade flew right back out of the landing ramp and went off on the ground. The landing ramp quickly raised and the group was left in the open hangar with gas filling the room. A few curses filled the room, but with their masks, the gas was no big deal for them. That changed, however, when a quickly muted scream came from just a short distance away. With the gas obscuring their vision, no one in the hangar could be sure what was happening. Each member brandished a blaster, but the most they could see was a shadow that would appear and disappear inside the plume of gas. "It's an ambush," a muffled voice said. Several shots rang out, followed by another yell. The sound of a body hitting the ground was heard by the remaining few. The gas finished dispersing and everything was silent in the hazy hangar. No sooner had they believed that the ambush was over than another yell came from across the room. "Find some cover," the leader yelled, but with the gas he couldn't see much of anything. Through the obscured air he managed to find some metal crates and nearly tripped over them. Getting behind them, his gun moved back and forth in unison with his narrowed field of vision as he tried to find any trace of movement. Somewhere in the hangar, someone was shouting for help, but the shouts decreased in volume until they stopped entirely. A shadow came at him from his right and he fired 2 shots. Both hit, and the figure dropped. As the gas began to dissipate, he got up from behind the position and moved to the body with blaster trained on it. Only a few feet from it, he quickly realized that it was one of his own men. Before he could do anything, he felt the presence of someone behind him. A sharp pain shot through his back and then nothing. His unresponsive body fell to the ground. "I can't move or feel anything below my neck," he realized, and could barely move his neck to help him glance around. He tried to yell for help but only ended up coughing up blood. A dark figure was standing above him, which was just slightly out of his immediate vision. His attention was quickly caught by the landing ramp, which had just lowered again. Naruto walked down the ramp, followed by a frustrated Suigetsu. As he moved down the ramp, the Force user pushed the gas away from the ramp and helped to disperse it out the open-topped hangar. "Damn it," Suigetsu remarked as he looked around at the bodies. "You finished all of them off before I even got out here." He finished looking at Meizu, who stood above one of the bodies. "Does this kind of gas affect you?" questioned Meizu, and the other Kiri ninja frowned. He honestly wasn't sure if his hydrification technique could protect him from something like that. Naruto ignored the two as he made his way to the still-breathing intruder. Meizu had been told to at least leave one of them alive to find out information from. Walking over to the man, he bent down and placed his hand on the man's head to gather information. "As for myself, I suppose you could say I'm in the shipping business," Plagueyes answered as he furthered the small talk at the table and slowly began to loosen the other players' tongues. In just a short while he would not only be taking their money from cheating but also a large amount of precious information. He could feel Kabuto in another area of the room already working on gathering other information that could also be useful to them. Kabuto seemed to be chatting with a native to the planet, while his current sabacc game was with one smuggler and 2 gunrunners that were either regulars to the planet or just passing through. Between the 2 of them, they should be finished in an hour or so. The other players were initially hesitant to let him join their game, but once they saw how much he had, they decided to let his money join the game. Sabacc was a game of strategy as much as it was luck, but when you could alter the programming of the droid dealer and the game's randomization computer, it became a game that he couldn't possibly lose. Initially, however, he would purposefully lose but then defeat his opponents after getting the information he wanted. Then all he would have to do is find a place to stay while Naruto dealt with the footwork. "What's that one over there?" questioned Jugo as he looked through a pair of electrobinoculars at the spaceport set out before them. "I believe that is a Vashan. It's an insectoid species," replied Naruto as he looked through his own modified goggles. Let me see, demanded Karen as she pulled the single pair of electro-binoculars from Jugo to look out over the spaceport. They were sitting on the roof of the open hangar where the ship was. Naruto was trying to get them, and himself, used to seeing different species so they wouldn't make a scene when they went out into the city as soon as Playguys and the other two were back. What an ugly fucker, commented the second red-haired girl who had taken the binoculars from Karen. Naruto ignored the comment as he stared up at the foreign sky and took it all in. It was strange to look at a sky without a moon, but that wasn't the oddest part. Because of the planet's unique orbit, the sky was always in a state of dusk or perhaps dawn. Maybe a combination of the two. With one side of the planet always facing the sun, and the other always facing away, there really was no definitive night or day. The sky was always the same. Looking in one direction, he came upon the sun, and glancing in the other he could see the night sky and just a handful of stars at the very edge of the dark horizon. So all of these species just walk around normally and no one really gives them much notice? Questioned Jugo, and Naruto was brought out of his thoughts. No, probably not. Unless it was a species not normally seen or one that they had never seen before, then they might give it some notice but then move on about their business, answered Naruto, and he could feel the orange-haired teen feeling relieved at the answer. Perhaps given what he turns into, he feels that he always looks different than normal people, or something along those lines. Naruto reasoned, but he decided not to ask. This is boring. Maybe we should break out a sniper rifle and have some fun from up here, Sogetsu suggested, and a few others sweat dropped at the idea. Why is it that your goggles seem just as good as these binoculars but they're so much smaller and lighter? Tayuya questioned to change the subject as well as point out something that she had been wondering about. She was still holding the large and heavy binoculars and looking back and forth between the two. The others also looked at him, and he could feel some jealousy and envy sweep through the group. I made these years ago from a normal pair of goggles and a pair of those electro-binoculars. Do you want some too? Questioned Naruto to the group and tried to determine their real reactions and thoughts on the matter. Yes. Who wants to carry around something so bulky and heavy like this? Karen stated, and he could feel some agreement from the others on the matter. All right. When we go out later for clothes and other supplies, I'll see if I can find pairs of goggles and binoculars for each of you and then have my clones make some goggles like mine, he said, and honestly the thought made him feel something. Perhaps it was just excitement over creating a gadget. He wasn't really sure what it was. Why do we need to go out for clothes? Questioned Meizu. Well, technically you don't really need new clothes, but myself and the others do, he answered, and feeling the oncoming barrage of questions, he decided to explain himself. When you looked out at the people walking the streets, did you all notice how differently they dress? Our fashion isn't necessarily the same as what the galaxy uses. Nobody wears open-toed combat sandals and most people have a slightly different fashion sense. Meizu's clothing isn't that different from what other people wear, especially with that poncho that both of you wear. Also, his ability allows him to change his clothing at will. He doesn't need anything new. Once Master Playguys gets back with money that we can use, then we can go and purchase all that we need. Some holsters for our blasters would be nice, and I'd like to see what clothing they have and how it compares to what we had back in Ibanez. It's best to fit in as well as we can, and few of the things we currently wear won't make us stand out. Why do we have to wait for them to get back? Can't we just use something else to trade? Why didn't we just bring some gold or something? They value gold, right? Tayuya inquired, and Naruto stared dumbfounded at her. I didn't think of it, he admitted out loud, and few snickers could be heard among the other group members. While the paper Rio bills would be worthless, some of the coins as well as several precious metals found on their planet would be something that they could have traded with. The only thing they did bring was a good amount of refined chakra metal and storage scrolls filled with ninja supplies. There was no way he would ever trade those supplies, but he definitely could have brought something else or converted Gado's wealth to gold. Frowning, Naruto decided to push those thoughts out of his mind and focus on what was important, while the others continued to converse. They needed a ship to steal more supplies to sell later, and he needed to find some materials from the junkyard to continue with his modifications and other inventions. The information he had obtained from the thugs that tried to take their cargo told him about the spaceport, which was called Sarafuria. Not very original, but the name apparently changed with each new criminal that took ownership from the criminal before them. The city had changed hands many times and was currently ruled by a human named Mordovars, who was a pirate that decided to settle down in one area. Apparently the man had plans to gather money and buy mercenaries or better ships to begin taking control of the planet and the surrounding system. The other two spaceports were also owned by other criminals of different species, and they sometimes fought each other to gain control of all the ports on the planet. He wasn't exactly sure if Plagueyes had any more plans for the planet, but thought perhaps they should consider trying to gain the starport. Owning a planet with an unregulated spaceport could be lucrative and provide information as well as different contacts for them in the future. I'll have to inquire about this with Master Plagueyes when he gets back, he reminded himself, and continued to look at the strange but beautiful sky. Pulling his winnings toward himself, Plagueyes allowed a small smirk to form on Gato's face. The three other players at the table, however, were far from thrilled. They had just lost everything that they had to the short newcomer. Thoughts of fairness and the possibility of being cheated had already gone through their minds, and Plagueyes knew it was time to leave before he was attacked inside the cantina. Telepathically signaling Gozu, the Kiri ninja approached the table, and the other players were temporarily put at bay from attacking. Taking the winnings, he walked away from the table side by side with Gozu. Gozu. Kabuto. At least one of them will no doubt try and take back their winnings in the alley. Kill them. Plagueyes commanded, and as soon as they got outside and into the alley near the cantina, Gozu pulled out a storage scroll and quickly helped Plagueyes seal all the winnings inside of it. Plagueyes took the scroll and continued on his way down the alley and to an adjacent side street that would take him back to the main street. No sooner had he done this, then two of the three players came around the corner of the cantina and began moving for their weapons. Gozu sprang into action, and faster than the human opponent could draw a gun, the Kiri ninja's clawed hand stabbed into the man's throat. The dying man nearly collapsed but attempted to shoot Gozu before he died, but was quickly disarmed and expired moments later. Standing next to Gozu was an incredible surprised and scared red Nikto. The Nikto was slower than the human and froze at seeing the human next to him attacked. Forcing himself to action, the Nikto continued to reach for his blaster. The being got the blaster out of the holster and pointed it at Gozu, but then stopped moving and grunted in pain before he could fire. Standing behind the Nikto was Kabuto, holding a laser scalpel that was embedded into the spine of the Nikto. It seems your spine reacts quite the same as a human's in this situation. I will have to study your corpse further in order to make sure that is indeed the case, but it is definitely something that I am looking forward to. You're quite the interesting specimen, commented Kabuto as he looked over the thick hands, facial horns, and ridges on the head of the tan and reddish creature. Removing his newest toy, the laser scalpel, he then shoved it through the brain stem of the Nikto, which caused instant death. Pulling out his corpse scroll, Kabuto's snake attachment moved on its own and wrapped around the body, bringing it to the scroll and setting it on one of the empty storage seals. After sealing the Nikto, the snake then moved to the human and did the same. Why do you want the human too? Questioned Gozu as he watched the snake ninja work. You never know what this body could tell you until you examine it. He likely has different antibodies in his blood that could be interesting or even of use to us. We are in a completely different environment with different diseases and illnesses, explained Kabuto as he finished sealing the human, and then made sure the coast was clear before exiting the alley and following Plagueyes back to the hangar. There was still work to be done before he could get a chance to look at his newest acquisitions. Karen was the first to sense the three returning individuals and told the rest of the group. Despite her problems in space, she had gotten better now that they were on a planet. There was no chakra or signatures to sense, but she found that her sensor abilities were still quite useful. Back on Ibanez, her sensing was like viewing something in color, but now, on the planet, it was like viewing a world of gray. The people were all similar shades of gray, and it was difficult to tell them apart. She still had her large range, but it was still something she was getting used to. Jumping off the top of the roof, she landed on the ship and moved to the side to jump to the surface of the hangar to use the loading ramp. As she did this, the three returning group members entered the hangar and followed Karen up the ramp. Play Guys walked to the circular table and sat down in one of the high back seats. Kabuto and Gozu took up other seats as well, and they eagerly waited to hear about what had transpired. Our trip proved rewarding. The ship is now sold, and I've made arrangements at the junkyard so we can stay in the ship until we find a suitable replacement. At the Cantina, I gained information about a group of Gunrunners that are about to unload a shipment of weapons to an area of the planet known as the Crasho Salt Rifts. The drop-off will happen in the next few hours. All we have to do is locate this area. Play Guys revealed, and he turned to Kabuto to see if the team could add anything else. Slightly adjusting his glasses and then stroking his snake attachment's head, Kabuto began. My information gathering was actually quite fortuitous as well, and only serves to augment what Master Play Guys has just revealed. I also learned of the Salt Rifts, and I was able to get their location on the planet. Additionally, another individual told me about the history of the planet. It was apparently colonized, or perhaps home to a species known as the Seraphurians, but they became extinct after the planet stopped rotating. Their ruins, as well as the ruins of another species, cover parts of the wastelands. There were also rumors that a specific area of these ruins on the colder side of the planet gives those that venture near it an ominous feeling that they cannot shake off unless they leave the area. Some even say that there is a room full of treasure there. A small knowing smile adorned Kabuto's face as he finished giving his information. He knew the information on the area would spark interest in Play Guys and Naruto. "And I suppose you found out where this area might be?" inquired Play Guys. It seemed the teen was quite adept at information gathering, and if he was correct, Kabuto's information could be more valuable than his own. "I have general coordinates, but nothing exact," replied Kabuto, and Play Guys nodded while coming up with a plan of action. He himself was in no condition to travel with Gato's body no matter how much he wanted to, and there was still work to be done that needed supervising. After a short period of silence, Play Guys spoke. "Naruto, I want you to take part of the group to get clothes that will let them blend in better. Make sure you aren't seen. After that, we will split up into 3 groups. One group will stay and work on unloading the ship to give away to the junk dealer, while the other 2 groups will head off to the areas that Kabuto and I have found. Once there, they will take anything of value and return." Naruto, however, wanted to add something else. "Master, will there be time to take a look through the junkyard?" Play Guys wasn't surprised about his student's interest in the junkyard, as such a place, full of pieces of different technology, no doubt greatly appealed to Naruto. However, he really didn't want to use up the remainder of their storage scrolls, or perhaps start filling the storage area of a new ship with pieces of junk. Deciding that it was best to first take care of everything else, he replied, "If when we are finished, and there are no other matters to attend to, then you can spend however much time you want in the junkyard before we leave." Naruto's smile was partially hidden by his cloak. Standing up, he made to leave the ship with the others and replaced his breather over his mouth. 5 figures stealthily moved across the rooftops of the spaceport as they headed to a local establishment. They could have used the henge jutsu, but they would have to dispel it at some point in order to pick out clothing that actually fit them. The group jumped off a roof and landed in a nearby alley. Individually, they each headed out of the alley in timed intervals and entered a nearby store. A group of children would garner more attention than just individuals. Naruto was the last to enter the store. He stood in the doorway for a few seconds as he looked over all the merchandise. The shop sold a variety of clothing styles and featured a variety of cloth from natural to synthetic. Hopefully they do custom orders. Naruto thought, as they would certainly need customization of all their clothes and get their shoes altered. The other people he traveled with were already searching through the store. Each person seemed to be able to find something of interest, whether actual clothing or just fabric, and apparently several outfits had already been chosen and placed on the counter. While this was going on, Naruto went to the owner and asked, "I'll need quite a few custom orders and modifications to some of our existing clothing." The person behind the counter only nodded and watched the boy walk off to another area of the store and start picking out utility belts and gun holsters. "What a weird bunch of kids," the man remarked, and began making sure they weren't stealing from him. 5 piles of clothes soon filled the front table, and he began thinking they might use the weapons they had to take the clothing, but money was quickly produced for the clothing and also for the alterations. One by one, each of the 5 left the store and headed back to the ship. Surgetsu was now sporting a dark purple flight suit with a white vest. The suit lacked any of the life support systems, and it was only a children's suit, something which Karen laughed at, but it was what he wanted and he purchased several of them using the money Naruto had. Jugo left the store with very conservative and cheap clothing consisting of black pants, a tan shirt, and a thin vest. Considering that if he used his bloodline, the clothing would likely get torn to shreds, he felt it was best to stick with something simple that could be easily replaced. Karen and Tayuya left the store together. They had purchased armor-weave body gloves on Naruto's suggestion, and then covered the glove with a shirt and either shorts or a skirt. The large bags only put a smile on Karen's face as it was the first time she had done some extensive shopping since leaving Konoha. Tayuya only rolled her eyes at the happy girl but was also sporting the same amount of clothing. Naruto was the last to leave the store and told the patron, "Our faces and ages were nothing of note," which the man promptly repeated before he left. Naruto also sported a black body glove but covered it with a pair of his ninja pants, a light shirt, and a hooded vest that he had acquired from Ibanez that was similar to his Chunin vest. He decided to forego the cloak as it only made him attract attention, and instead used the hood on the vest along with his breather to cover his most distinctive marks. Ironically, he looked almost the same as he had when he was a ninja of Konoha. Each member also now had a utility belt with their ninja pouches attached at the back and sported a holster with blaster. Their shoes had also been modified to have the foot completely covered. Returning to the ship, Playguys flew it to the outskirts of the spaceport where the junkyard was. With it in the junkyard, there was little chance that someone might try to take their cargo again. Ships in a junkyard were usually put there because they didn't work and no one was usually allowed to still live in the ships. Naruto was quite eager to scrounge through the mounds of junk, but they still had work to do. That, however, didn't stop his eyes from roaming through the piles every time he passed. The first group that left the ship was Kabuto, Suigetsu, and Tayuya. They were sent out to the salt rifts in search of the Gunrunners. Kabuto's new appendage allowed him to sense nearby signatures, and the snake had an enhanced sense of smell. In the second group, Naruto traveled with Karen and Meizu. They were off in search of the area that Kabuto spoke of in the dark region of the planet. The junkyard owner had been persuaded to allow Naruto to use his skiff, which was a short-range repulsor lift vehicle, so that they could travel to the dark region much faster. The salt rifts were relatively close in comparison, and could easily be reached on foot. Playguys, Jugo, and Goza stayed on board the ship and would be removing as many useful items from the ship as they could before leaving it. Playguys had watched out of the cockpit windows as the two groups began moving out in separate directions to their destinations. He knew what would be in store for Kabuto's group but not for Naruto's. The only advice that he could give to his student was to be cautious. It was possible that whatever his student was heading for was just a dark side force nexus. However, it was also possible that it was some kind of tomb or perhaps once a lair of a Sith. It could be dangerous, but he was in no condition to go exploring. Gato's body was beginning to give out, or at least he only had a month or so left. The problem he was having finding a replacement was a lack of suitable candidates. Now that they were back in the galaxy, he had the luxury of being picky when it came to choosing a new body. He at least wanted a tall body that was fit and preferably force-sensitive. The more force-sensitive a host body he found, the more of his own force powers would return to him. His thoughts took him to the communications systems where he sat down in a high-backed chair and began preparing to send out a coded transmission. Sidious had no doubt taken over all of his accounts, assets, hideouts, and just about everything else he had when he was still alive. He couldn't risk trying to access any of his bank accounts or get in touch with any of his former agents that he had used. However, he still had one contact that Sidious knew nothing about. Right before he died, he had looked for suitable candidates for his new experiment on midichlorian manipulation. The goal was to find a suitable female to use his technique on. Not wanting anyone to find out what he was doing, he chose a planet near his hideout and reprogrammed a medical droid to secretly work for him. Using the droid, he gained access to patients at a local hospital as well as patient records. From that list, he had chosen a subject. He chose based upon medical history, midichlorian count, and a variety of other factors that had led him to a specimen that would suit his purpose. Not a week before being killed, he had put his experiment into motion and used the technique on the woman while she was sedated during a fake procedure for a fake medical condition that the droid had fabricated for him. If his experiment worked, then a child with incredible force ability and midichlorian count had been born nearly 15 years ago, and may provide him with the perfect host. The planet the experiment took place on not very noteworthy or useful, so the child was likely still there, safe from Sidious and out of sight from the Jedi. With the connection created, Plague Eyes waited for the droid to answer. He had given it orders to periodically check for messages from him, but it had been so long that the droid may no longer even be in operation or could have had its memory wiped at some point. The signal was eventually answered by the medical droid that he had reprogrammed. "Who is this?" questioned the droid in an even voice. Plague Eyes quickly replied with, "Activate program Plague Eyes 1. The droid's photoreceptor dimmed and then lit back up as the program activated and put the droid under his control. He had concealed the program in the droid's memory banks. The program was activated with the command, and once deactivated, the medical droid would go about its basic function without ever realizing that anything out of the ordinary had happened. "This is Master Plague Eyes droid. Yes, I am aware that I have changed quite a bit since we last spoke. Our last conversation was 5,329 standard days ago." The droids responded. Yes, I am aware of that. What I want to know is the status of the experiment," inquired Plague Eyes as his patience waned slightly. "Monitoring of Test Subject 1, Shmi Skywalker, was terminated 4,500 days ago." "Terminated? For what reason?" demanded Plague Eyes as his thoughts raced over possible complications or what else that could have gone wrong. "Test Subject 1 was transported off the planet, and no longer within my capabilities of monitoring." "Was the subject pregnant or was a child delivered?" asked Plague Eyes with some urgency. "Negative. No changes in health status were noted." It failed. Plague Eyes realized and couldn't believe what the droid was telling him. He had accounted for everything and chosen the best subject available. Why hadn't it succeeded? "I must find out what went wrong." "Where was the test subject transported?" "The subject was sold to a slaver and transported to Tatooine," replied the droid as it accessed planetary records, and Plague Eyes sat back in the chair as he went over the information. "I'll need to travel to Tatooine then and see if she is still there. But how will I do it?" Plague Eyes wondered, as he didn't want to tell anyone about his failed experiment. Judging their reactions was difficult, and losing cohesion in the group was not something that they needed. Telling them that they needed to go to an obscure planet so he could analyze and experiment on a woman was out of the question. With only a single ship for them to use in the near future, how could he possibly explain an impulsive trip to a planet such as Tatooine? Suigetsu couldn't even survive on such a planet, and what would be there that he could convince Naruto or the rest of the group that they would be interested in? The weapons, he realized, and began developing a valid reason. Their cargo was technically stolen, but Tatooine was controlled by the Hutts, and they wouldn't care where the weapons came from or who their current owner was. Well, at least the current Hutt wouldn't care where they came from. Their cargo actually belonged to a Hutt, but if he found a Hutt of a different clan, then selling it the weapons wouldn't matter. The sale itself could be dangerous as the Hutts weren't trustworthy, but what other choice did he have? There are also Rakatan ruins on Tatooine. Plague Eyes remembered and knew that it would certainly interest Naruto enough to make the planet stand out as the next destination, or at least one of the next destinations. He wasn't sure what would still be in the ruins or even where the ruins were, but those were things for Naruto to find out when they got there. Likely his student would also have to negotiate with the Hutt without him being present, but Naruto could handle it. Coming back to the matter at hand, he heard Jugo and Gozu moving around in the aft of the ship, and he saw the droid staring back at him on the screen. "Program end," stated Plague Eyes, and he turned off the screen, severing the communication, just as the droid's photoreceptors dimmed again. Getting up from his seat, he headed to the medical bay to supervise the removal of the Bacta tank. "This damn thing's heavy," Gozu commented to Jugo as Plague Eyes neared the room. The pair were attempting to move the heavy piece of medical equipment on their own. "That tank is worth several times more than the entire ship. Be careful with it," stated Plague Eyes from the doorway. "Why is it worth so much?" asked Gozu as both ninjas stopped what they were doing and looked to Plagueyes. The substance inside is very expensive. Normal ships of this size don't have back-to tanks, and they typically cost a large amount of money. Out here they would probably cost even more. How did this ship get one? Inquired Jugo, and Plagueyes smirked at the question. The ship's former occupants took it from my lab along with other medical supplies and then installed it on the ship. I intend to keep it, considering that it belongs to me in the first place, stated Plagueyes as he moved the repulsor lift cart over to the tank. When you begin tipping it over, I'll use my powers to lighten it as much as I can, said Plagueyes, and the other two nodded as they got ready to remove the tank. Kabuto, Suigetsu, and Taiya jumped over the rocky terrain as they headed to the salt rifts. They weren't sure what to expect as Kabuto's information was sketchy on what the physical feature actually was. Plagueyes' information also only concerned the delivery of the gun shipment, as the person he gathered information from was of the same Gunrunner group. They therefore had little to go on, and the shipment wasn't to arrive for at least another hour. So, what's the plan? Asked Suigetsu as he turned to Kabuto, who was put in charge of the mission. We kill them and then take the cargo as well as the ship if we can. I like that plan, replied Suigetsu. How do we operate the ship? Asked Taiya with a deadpan expression, and the other two nearly tripped. Perhaps we take one hostage and force him to fly us back, or just call for Naruto, suggested Kabuto, and Suigetsu nodded at the revised plan while Taiya shook her head at getting picked for the wrong group. Naruto piloted the skiff just a dozen meters off the surface as he headed to the coordinates that Kabuto had acquired. He was uneasy traveling to a place without knowing much information, but the possibility of rewards outweighed his worries. Turning around, he glanced at his passengers. Meizu was enjoying the nighttime ride while Karen had her arms crossed, and he could tell that the dropping temperature and cold blowing wind from their fast travel was beginning influencing her. You should probably put on that thermal poncho I gave you, Naruto commented while keeping his eyes on the dark terrain ahead of them. Karen looked to the cloth that was sitting on the floor of the skiff next to where she was sitting. It's made for a variety of climates, and should keep you warm. Even with the body glove you have on, the cold will start to affect you. The farther we go, the worse it will get, added Naruto, and Karen grabbed the cloak and put it on. It would only take a little bit longer to get to the location, given how fast the skiff was, but they could no longer see the sun and were almost completely in darkness. It took about an hour to reach their destination, and once they laid eyes on it, there was no question that they had found what they were looking for. Below them in a large, relatively flat valley was the salt rift. While the surrounding rock was dark in color, the rift was covered in layers of salt, making the entire valley a white color. There were jagged outcroppings of salt, and then numerous large and small skeletons of long-dead creatures that were also covered in the white crystalline substance. The area had apparently once been an ocean and abundant with life, but now all that was left was a salty graveyard. The bones and stalactites were so numerous that it created a myriad of different hazards and obstacles. The features were so large, tall, and numerous that it created many dark rifts and crevices that looked ideal to hide something. Given the vastness of the area, a person could search for weeks and not find anything of interest. The trio was relatively silent as they each looked over the feature set out before them. They would have to wait until the right time for the shipment, but from their vantage point they would be able to see any ship that came to the rifts. Once the shipment came, they would be able to run down to the valley and then run on top of the salt rift to get to wherever the ship landed. From what they could see through the binoculars, there were several places for a ship, similar in size to what they had, to land and then unload. The rift only extended so far, and then it was just flat rock. Moving across the hill they were on, they repositioned themselves in a better spot closer to the landing spots that they could see. It did look incredibly treacherous, but each person was confident that they could make the journey when the time called for it. Until then, they would stay out of sight from a ship. The first thing she noticed as they walked across the barren landscape was the lack of noise. There was no noise at all, and even the air itself seemed completely still. It still seemed surreal that they were on a completely different planet. The skiff was only a short distance off as they searched the surrounding area. Focusing on her sensing ability, she searched the area for anything that seemed out of place. As her senses spread over the gray landscape in her mind, she happened upon an area that seemed darker than the rest of the surroundings. She was about to say something when she sensed something else in the distance. They apparently weren't the only ones out there. "Are you sure somebody is gonna come out all this way? I'm freezing my ass off," commented one man to the rest of the group. "Shut up, Ral. The boss said we had to come out here. That stool pigeon of his has been talking about this area for weeks in that stupid cantina before he finally got some sucker to listen to him. All we have to do is wait for whoever they send out here." "But we don't even know what's in that stupid cave," replied the man. "That's why we're getting someone else to help us find out. I don't like this any more than you do. I remember the first group that were sent to check it out. Only 2 of their group returned and they had lost their minds. I want to stay as far away from that place as possible, but you've heard the rumors. A tomb full of treasure and possibly one of the Tessents." Ral stayed silent, and neither of the other 2 men that were with him said anything else. If even part of the rumor was true, then they could be set for life. They wouldn't even bother sharing the spoils with the boss and just leave the planet with all that they could get their hands on. Movement in the distance caught the attention of each member. One pulled out a set of binoculars and spotted 3 figures in the distance. "I can see 3 coming this way. 2 of them look like kids," the man stated out loud with some surprise. "Kids? I wouldn't underestimate them. If these are the same ones that were at the hangar earlier, the group we sent after their cargo never came back." The ninja trio made their way through the dark terrain as they headed for the area that Karen indicated. Up ahead they could make out what looked like an entrance to a cave that was set at the bottom of a tall conical structure. Even in the dark they could tell that it was very different from the rest of the rock around it. The 3 continued on until 4 armed men sprang out from behind nearby rocks. "Hands where we can see them," said one of the ambushers while another moved in and began searching them one by one for any weapons. "They don't even have a blaster," commented the man, and though a few of the group found it strange, they didn't question it and then motioned to the opening, forcing the 3 to go first. "Why do you think they were waiting for us?" asked Karen as she sat behind some rocks looking down on the 4 men heading into the opening with the 3 shadow clones. "I don't think they lured us out here to rob us or something like that. They probably also believe something valuable is in there but are either too afraid to go in first or know that there are traps and wanted someone else to spring them," answered Naruto, and then he looked to her. "Karen, I want you to stay here and look after the entrance. Meizu and I will go in after them." "You're going to leave me here all alone?" Karen questioned with an exasperated yell. "Would you rather go in there?" asked Meizu. "I'll dutifully monitor your progress from out here," replied Karen with a nod. Kabuto had used an earth jutsu to create a covering over them as they laid on the ground to prevent them from being spotted from the air. Taking turns, they looked through the electro-binoculars for a ship. Up until that point, nothing of interest had happened. There were no movements in the rift or surrounding area, and not even so much as an animal could be seen. However, what began as a low rumbling quickly turned all 3 heads to the sky as a ship appeared out of the clouds and slowed down to settle on the outskirts of the rift. Kabuto zoomed in on the ship and watched it land. A loading ramp lowered and several figures came out with a repulsor lift cart and several crates of what presumably were weapons. In addition to the ones on the ship, several others came out of the rift and met them. They were too far outside of his range to feel or his snake's range to track, so he didn't know how many were actually there. He could only count what he could see, and he counted 10 altogether. The humanoids were quite similar to the one he had collected earlier, and were apparently from a group called the Cantina and Gunrunners. Glancing at the others, they got the message and came out of their hiding place. They only needed the weapons, but the ship was also there for the taking. Naruto and Meizu followed a good distance behind the group and the shadow clones. Naruto was alert and looking for traps, but so far he hadn't found any. The cave turned out to be a long winding tunnel that steadily went deeper into the ground. They were already tens of meters beneath the surface. The tunnel was quite odd, as the walls had a strange structure to them that wasn't really rock but some kind of substance that wasn't identifiable. Naruto was brought out of musings on the walls when he heard shouts echoing down the tunnel and then a single blaster shot. Before he could contact his clones, Their memories flooded back to him but deprived him of valuable intelligence concerning what had happened. Given the instantaneous dispelling of all three clones, he figured it must have been a trap of some kind but had no idea what. Erring on the side of caution, he and Meizu slowly made their way to a chamber. Coming upon the area the clones had dispelled, they found the 4 men that had tried to ambush them. 2 had evidently attacked each other, each being mortally injured and dying on the floor, while 1 had dropped to the floor in a catatonic state, with the final one killing himself with a blaster. In addition to those bodies, he found an additional 2 bodies that had been dead for quite some time. The cold temperature had probably prevented some decomposition of the corpses, and he was thankful for his breather mask which likely filtered out the smell. It was a strange sight and Naruto refrained from entering the room until he had determined what might have caused their deaths. Both and Meizu looked around but only found 2 oddities in the room. There was a single carving of the upper portion of a cloaked figure on the opposite wall near an opening to another identical tunnel, and also some kind of lettering or glyphs were carved above that opening. Naruto couldn't make out the lettering as it was unrecognizable to him, though he could feel that it was important, and believed it to be some kind of warning or instruction. The sculpture was of some kind of insectid species that was also unrecognizable to him. Besides the bodies, nothing else in the room stood out. Is the sculpture the trigger to the trap? Naruto wondered and did his best to sense the surrounding area with all that was available to him. Strangely, he felt as though he was being watched and looked to the statue. Despite being inanimate, he felt like the carved face was looking at him. Searching his mind, he tried to gain as much information as possible from the memories of the clones right before they dispelled. However, the only thing he received was an intense feeling of fear. Fear killed them, he questioned and decided that instead of proceeding, that he would bypass the chamber and whatever trap had been set to stop those that entered. We're not entering this chamber, Naruto stated, and Meizu looked to him in question. Naruto went through several hand seals and Meizu understood what Naruto was up to, so he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Once the hand seals were finished, they began sinking into the ground beneath them. The pair moved unseen to the other side of the room and emerged at the entrance to the other tunnel. Making several clones, Naruto sent them on ahead as a precaution. The elaborate trap only confirmed that something must be ahead of them. Jumping across the top of the salt rifts was difficult, but they were nearly at the ship. Kabuto could now tell with his snake appendage that they were only 10 of the humanoids. 6 had come from the ship while 4 had come out of a hiding spot in the salt rifts. Apparently the hiding place that the Gunrunners used to store weapons was actively guarded. The group stopped less than 30 meters from the ship to make a quick plan before going in. I'll go and find the bolt hole that they are using while you 2 secure the ship, Kabuto ordered, and the other 2 nodded in agreement. Suigetsu took off towards the ship, leaving Tayuya behind, and Kabuto slithered into the rift. The scene was incredibly creepy to Tayuya, and she shivered at the sight of Kabuto meandering through the crevices in the salt rift. Looking towards the direction the ship was in, she decided that she wasn't really needed and decided to hold back. The Kiri ninja was seemingly immune to the weaponry of the galaxy while she wasn't. She wasn't scared but merely cautious. Until Naruto finished that chakra armor that he had been talking about on their journey to the planet, she wasn't going to run carelessly into a fight. Continuing farther into the tunnel system, the duo eventually came to what appeared to be the end of the journey. They had bypassed an additional chamber with respective trap, but other than that, nothing else had been activated or come across. Naruto stood at the end of the tunnel and examined the large chamber. Somehow the room was slightly lit by unseen sources, but the majority was still dark. It was quite a bit larger than the other chambers they had come across. His eyes widened upon seeing the contents of the room. From what Kabuto had said, it was to be filled with treasure, but that wasn't what he was seeing. Sculptures of various sizes decorated the room. They were placed on tables or scattered across the room. To his eyes, it was obvious that the same person had made all of the sculptures, as they were made from similar stone, and had many similarities. Most of the sculptures were simply unrecognizable to him, though. He couldn't tell what they were supposed to be, if they were supposed to be anything. "Is this the treasure?" commented Meizu, and Naruto wasn't sure how to answer. Artwork could be valuable, but he had no idea what significance or value could be placed on the items in the room. His attention was soon caught by the features on the opposite side of the room, which appeared to be a sarcophagus as well as another cloaked sculpture carved into the wall above the resting place. Given that the dark side of the force was the strongest in the room they were currently looking at, Naruto reasoned that the sarcophagus must have been filled with the remains of a Sith, and the dark side coming off the remains had created the dark side nexus in the immediate area. Moving away from the sarcophagus, Naruto's eyes rested upon several other objects that certainly caught his attention. On the ground near the sarcophagus were the remains of an individual that was beyond identifying. In front of the corpse was a raised dais that had two other items. The first was in the very center, and was clearly a Sith holocron. The second, however, was more difficult to identify. It appeared to be a white sculpture that did not fit with the other such pieces in the room. The sculpture was more identifiable to him as it appeared to be of some kind of winged cat. Several thoughts went through Naruto's head as he gazed upon the room. He was apprehensive at the sight of the body. It meant that someone was able to get past the other traps, only to be caught by surprise at the end or perhaps killed by the spirit of a Sith. Now that he knew what he was dealing with, it only made sense that a spirit, similar to his own master, was inhabiting the tunnel system. It was likely using carved sculptures of itself to guard its resting place and treasure. To some degree, it made sense, however, the placement of the holocron confused him. Plagueyes had told him that Sith were usually entombed with their most precious items. Placing a holocron out in the open would imply that it was meant to be taken, or at least its knowledge was meant to be passed on to whomever found the tomb and made it that far. Contrary to that thought was the rotting corpse on the floor. If the holocron was meant to be passed on, why was the person killed? Naruto wondered and came up with several theories. It was possible that the person was deemed to be unsuitable in some way. Perhaps the spirit had been angered in some way. These thoughts, however, did not explain the sculpture that stood out in the room. If the Sith entombed here made the sculptures around the room, then perhaps it was an offering, he reasoned as his mind worked to come up with a way to get the holocron. The treasure was not something he considered worthwhile, but the holocron could be most useful. That line of thinking did seem somewhat logical, as it made some sense that perhaps to gain the holocron, an exchange or trade might have been initiated by the deceased. It, however, did not help him in determining how he could remain alive and still get the holocron. Looking back at the white sculpture, he again noticed that it clashed with every other sculpture in the room. The force was also telling him that the observation was of some significance. So the Sith was not pleased with the offering and killed the person that brought it. Then what should I do? He wondered and thought about what he could give. He had no sculptures, and making one on the spot could just as easily offend the spirit as the once living person had done. He also wasn't nearly as artistic or gifted as the Sith artisan had been, and had no idea how to deal with the Sith spirit. Whether the force techniques he could use would affect the spirit, he wasn't sure. The only items he had which were artistic, or at least similar to sculptures, were his weapons. His sword and disc blades were not, however, something that he could part with. It took another minute to think up what he could possibly trade, and eventually he came upon something feasible. It wouldn't be a loss, and hopefully it would appease the spirit. He thought about making a shadow clone and sending it forward, but quickly decided against it. Taking a deep breath, he entered the chamber and headed for the sarcophagus. Jumping off the last vestiges of the salt rifts, Suigetsu twirled in the air and came down upon one of the gunrunners that was just heading from the ship with a load. He caught them completely by surprise, and his kunai drove into the head of a Nikto while a thrown kunai pierced the throat of a second one. Suigetsu landed on the ground and charged the rest. One pulled out a blaster while the other went for some kind of melee weapon. Suigetsu dodged as the one of the humanoids tried to slice him apart with an interesting weapons that reminded him of a knuckle-duster with a curved blade on the end instead of just blunt metal. Judging from the slight noise he could hear, it appeared that the weapon had vibration technology that Naruto had talked with him about. The thought of getting his hands on the device made him smile, and he dodged a swipe while another gunrunner came at him with a pike-like weapon while the other stayed back and fired several shots. Grabbing the arm of the punching creature, Suigetsu maneuvered the humanoid into another swing from the pike-wielding one, which cut deeply and easily through its torso. The surprise from killing a comrade was enough for Suigetsu to take advantage of and disarm the pike-like weapon to use against the wielder. Cutting off its legs, Suigetsu turned to the blaster, used one, and threw the pike as a spear. The thrown weapon pierced the chest of the final Nikto and killed it instantly. He was about to go back and finish off the others when he heard something coming from the ship. Turning around, he saw that the last of the group had managed to escape and made it to the cockpit of the ship. Thinking the Nikto would take off in the ship, Suigetsu hurried to make it to the still lowered ramp, but his attention was diverted to a weapon that popped down from the hull of the ship. It looked like a much larger blaster than he had seen, and he was unable to dodge as it pointed directly at him and unleashed rapid-fire bolts of plasma. The first few bolts hit him before he could even move and tore right through him. While normal blasters were of little consideration to him, the larger ones he was being hit with were burning off more water from his body than he could deal with. Running as best as he could, Suigetsu took cover behind a nearby rock, but the blaster fire was powerful enough to destroy the impromptu hiding place, which made the Kiri ninja curse loudly. Losing consistency, Suigetsu turned completely into a liquid and began slithering away to cover, avoiding the blaster bolts as best as he could. Moving past the dark sculptures and many shadowed areas, Naruto traveled through the chamber. His heart raced as he actively searched for danger. He could have sworn a moment before that one of the more statue-like sculptures had moved, but it could have just been a trick of the eyes. He was also feeling that he was being closely watched. As he moved ever closer to the dais, he began pulling out the needed supplies to make the trade. While he had no sculpting ability, he did have something else that was unique and hopefully would be accepted. If not, he would have to create and switch with a mud clone as fast as possible to escape what had killed his predecessor. Reaching the dais, his eyes didn't leave the carved figure behind the sarcophagus until he had all his supplies out. Pulling out his ink and his only spare scroll, Naruto set both items down on the surface of the circular dais and opened the scroll. Feeling out his surroundings with the force, he attempted to get an idea of what the spirit might be thinking. Now that he was so close to the sarcophagus, he found he could feel an actual presence, and not just the feeling of being watched. Gauging what little emotions were present, he found a slight feeling of curiosity coming from the spirit. Dipping his brush in the ink, he flattened out part of the scroll and used the force to help guide him as he began creating a myriad of fuinjutsu. He began by making seals that he definitely knew, and as he continued, his seals became more elaborate. One of the seals was an explosive seal that he planned to use as a distraction if the artwork was not accepted. As he continued with the fuinjutsu, it became more about mixing and adding fuinjutsu together instead of just using a single seal. Soon what he was brushing onto the paper was no longer fuinjutsu seals but some kind of amalgamation of everything that he knew. He even began adding Sith runes in. As ink covered inch after inch of scroll and the inches became feet as he continued to unravel more parchment and continue on, he stopped worrying about anything else and surrendered his brush hand completely to the force. Black liquid continued to flow over the parchment, and before he knew it, he had covered all 6 feet of parchment with ink. Blinking out of his trance, Naruto looked over what he had done and was actually quite surprised. What started off as simple and calculated had turned into something else entirely. Oddly, he actually found himself quite calm considering the situation. His breathing and even heart rate were now at a normal level. In the past, he had only ever felt like that when he was building something. He had felt similarly when he created his goggles, but it wasn't quite the same. The brushing was much more soothing. Realizing once again where he was, he nearly stopped, but once his senses felt no threat or danger, he pulled out a kunai and decided to carve out a few Sith runes into the outer edges of the paper in order to protect it. He probably shouldn't have been so concerned about it, but for some reason he wanted the scroll to last, even if he would never see it again. When he was completely finished, he turned the scroll around on the large dais, as if to show off his work and accept judgment. His nervousness came back in full as he stood still and looked up at the carved statue that also seemed to be looking down on him. Fuck! Suigetsu cursed as he was being pinned down by the large rapid-fire blaster. The Nikto in the cockpit was dead set on finishing him off and had changed a good portion of the landscape in front of the ship to do it. He was too far away from the salt rifts to get back there without incurring more loss of water, and his current damage was significant. He could no longer keep his form and was more or less a slow-moving puddle. Looking down at the trapped ninja, Taiyuya rolled her eyes and debated about what to do. She didn't want to put herself at risk, and it was Suigetsu's own fault for running in on his own. They were, however, supposed to be a group. If those two bastards read my mind and find out I did nothing to help, I'm not sure what they would do. With a sigh, the redhead created a few normal bunshin and sent them running around the area. While the clones were doing that, she jumped to the ground and carefully went through a set of hand seals. In her spare time, she had been learning some earth manipulation, and while she wasn't finished with the exercises yet, she did learn one jutsu that could help her. Making his way farther down an unknown path, Kabuto followed the sense of smell of his snake as he tracked down the 4 humanoids that were in the rifts. All he had to do was neutralize them, and he was curious to see how some of the poisons that his snake could produce would work on the species he was facing. Moving through the shadows, Kabuto could finally hear voices in a language that he didn't recognize. He wished he could interpret what they were saying, but there was little he could do at the moment. Unless they started speaking in basic, he would never know what their last words were. Coming out of his robes, the snake attachment moved to peek into the opening of the bolt hole that the Gunrunners were using. Kabuto closed his eyes and began viewing through what his appendage could see. It was something that he had discovered when Plagueyes was examining and testing his body. The snake appendage could not only detach from him, but he could both communicate and sense what it could sense whenever he wanted. Perhaps in time he could use or produce more than one attachment, but for the moment, it was all he needed. Seeing the new activity, the snake quickly returned to him. It appeared that the Nikto had received a message, from who he knew not, but he assumed it might be from the ship. They were pulling off the covers of several crates to arm themselves and began heading to the exit to presumably go back to the ship. Hopefully Suigetsu had some restraint, but given their current actions, I doubt it. He probably charged right at them, and one of them called for help. Kabuto surmised and prepared to attack. During their trip, he found that he could still summon snakes, despite no longer being on Ibanez. So as the 4 Nikto left the bolt hole and passed by Kabuto, 4 snakes shot out of the sleeve of his robe and wrapped around the Gunrunners before they could react. Squeezing tightly enough to cause pain and make them drop their weapons, the 4 were supported by the snakes as Kabuto stepped out of the shadows. Completely trapped, Kabuto's attached snake moved to the necks of each Nikto and injected each with a different venom. If they had to deal with that species again, it might be beneficial, at least to him, to know which poisons would work on such a different physiology. At least that was Kabuto reasoning for the experiment. Moments passed as Naruto contemplated snatching the holocron and making a break for it. He was expecting a sign or at least something that would let him know if the scroll was accepted. Nothing happened though. Extending his senses again, he searched for any negative feeling he could coming from the sculpture or sarcophagus. He guessed that he would feel anger or perhaps disgust if the barter was not accepted, but he found nothing of the sort. Slowly, he extended his hand forward across the dais. Flexing his fingers, as they for some reason seemed to get stiff, he inched closer to the holocron. His eyes were not on the metal object but rather his surroundings, and he was ready to leap back at the first sign of danger. As his hand reached the pyramidal object, his finger's tips touched the top of it. The metal was ice cold to the touch, and sent a chill through his arm and down the length of his spine. His fingers grasped the pyramid and pulled it off its resting place. With holocron in hand, Naruto locked his eyes to the carved face and was about to start backing up when he had a thought. The other item on the dais was the half-meter-tall white statue. He had ignored its presence until that moment. His scroll had evidently been accepted, but the small statue had not. If the Sith didn't like the statue, then he thought perhaps he should remove it from the tomb. After all, who would want something they hated sitting inside their tomb? If the corpse brought it there, then it may actually be worth something, he reasoned as his eyes looked between the cloaked and white statue in the room. Reaching again, his other hand grasped the white statue, and he waited for a moment for something to happen. When nothing did, Naruto picked it up and made to leave. He moved one step back when he felt the presence stirring. Completely alert and ready to run, he was surprised when he didn't feel any anger coming from the spirit. Instead, he received a mental picture of what the spirit wanted. Sighing, Naruto decided the small statue would be worth the price. Popping up at the loading ramp of the ship, Tayuya jumped out of the hole and silently made her way into the ship while it was shooting at her clones and Suigetsu. Suigetsu was also watching behind his newest hiding place as he saw Tayuya enter the ship. Looking to the cockpit, he smirked when he saw a shadow come up behind the creature that had been firing on him. His smirk only widened when he saw a spray and streak of blood appear across one of the cockpit windows. Exiting the ship, Tayuya cleaned off the kunai on one of the dead gunrunners that Suigetsu had killed. While she was doing that, Suigetsu moved over the surface of the ground towards her. "I need water," he said, and Tayuya looked at him with a frown. "Don't you have your own?" she commented as she put her kunai back in her pouch. "I do, but I can't reform my body enough to get into my pouches," explained Suigetsu, and Tayuya sighed before putting on a wry smile. "Sure, happy to help," stated Tayuya as she prepared to help her fellow group member by gathering saliva in her mouth. "Spit! You bitch! I wanted some bottled water, not your spit! That's disgusting!" yelled Suigetsu as he shook what appeared to be half-formed fist at her, and used the other partially formed hand to try and wipe the spit off his face. "Be more specific next time," Tayuya chided with a shrug, and then pulled out a scroll to unseal a bottle of water which she proceeded to dump on the puddling ninja. This would certainly be an entertaining story to tell Karen when they met back up. Moving back the way he had traveled, Kabuto led several of his Earth clones as they pushed a repulsor lift cart and carried many crates of assorted weapons to put back aboard the ship they were just removed from. Only 2 of the Nikto had been killed by the first administration of poison. It seemed that the other 2 were not as affected by their individual poisons. He would have to further study their bodies to find out why. It turned out that his snakes also had difficulty asphyxiating them, so he just finished off the 2 with one of new medical toys. Exiting the edge of the salt rifts, he found Tayuya and an apparently very thirsty Suigetsu arguing about something. He disregarded the pointless conversation as he adjusted his glasses and then decided what to do next. Of their group, only Naruto and Master Playguys could properly fly a ship. He was interested and had some brief instruction while they were traveling, but other than that, he had no experience. It was possible that they could pilot the ship back to Junkyard as it wouldn't require any skilled maneuvering, but he thought perhaps he should contact Naruto and have him swing by in the skiff. It might be better to keep the crates off the ship until they decided what to do with it. He had no knowledge on the ship in front of him, and it may or may not be suitable for their needs. One of the things he had learned was that the life support systems on a ship could only support so many beings. Adding more individuals than the system could handle was not something that could be done for longer periods of time. Eventually, the overtaxed system would not be able to recycle enough oxygen for the passengers to breathe. Searching his cloak and pockets for the holographic communicator, he planned to contact Master Playguys and provide an update on their success as well as seek further instruction. Putting aside his dismay at the situation, Naruto dragged the corpse by its leg across the length of the tomb and back to the tunnel he had entered through. Evidently a slow decomposition, or perhaps the climate in the chamber had caused the body to still be fleshy and rather disgusting to touch. He decided to not use his gloves as he wanted to keep them free of decomposition smell. This unfortunately meant that his hand was in contact with the body. Removing the corpse was the price for the statue. If the white statue turned out to be worthless, he would surely detonate the explosive seal he drew in the scroll which had been exchanged for the holocron. Making it to the end of the chamber and the tunnel, he gave Meizu a deadpan look and said, "Grab a leg." Meizu sighed and grabbed the other leg, helping Naruto to pull the body through the tunnel and back the way they came. Naruto planned to leave it in the next chamber before bypassing all the traps and heading straight to the surface. It was hard to gauge what he was feeling. He got the holocron, but the rumored treasure did not pan out. His thoughts moved to the men that had ambushed them, and he wondered if more might be coming. At first they seemed set on their cargo, then luring them into the cave, and now he wasn't sure what to think about what might happen next. From reading one of the thugs' minds back at the hangar, he knew the person sending them was named Mordo Vars, and the man owned the starport they were staying at. Technically, the crime boss just bullied the others in the port into paying money for protection, but the man's thugs also collected many other taxes. Given the hostilities between Vars and the other 2 individuals that owned the other starports on the planet, it was likely that, considering how many men Vars was now down, that another criminal or starport owner would try to take over. There was a chance they could leave before any reprisals or attacks happened, but he currently felt that perhaps another course of action was needed and that leaving would forfeit an opportunity. With his mind still forming a plan, Naruto and Meizu deposited the body in the next chamber, and then moved through the rock to get back to Karen on the surface. Sitting at the circular table on the ship, Plagueyes looked up from his datapad as he heard a beeping and saw a light blinking light on the table's control systems. Activating the holographic projector, Plagueyes accepted the message and the blue fuzzy image of Kabuto appeared at the center of the table. "Report," demanded Plagueyes as he tried to read as much of Kabuto's thoughts as possible. "We've taken a ship and many containers of weapons. Unfortunately, we can't fly the ship and we didn't leave a gunrunner alive to pilot it for us, so we have no way of getting back with the cargo," replied Kabuto. "I'll check in with Naruto and determine what to do from there. If he isn't done yet, then we'll have to figure something else out," responded Plagueyes as he thought of what else could be done. Kabuto gave a slight bow and his image disappeared. Leaning Gato's body back in the chair, Plagueyes thought about what else he could do. The problem was allocation of resources, and the only person besides himself that could fly was Naruto. Kabuto now had cargo and ship but possessed no way to move either. "When we get the chance, we'll have to start training the others in the basics of piloting a ship," Plagueyes mentally noted. It was quite a problem and oversight to have so many group members and only a select few that could pilot a ship. Perhaps he would just have Naruto do it. His students' clones would be able to train several members at once. Sitting forward, he pushed a button on the control panel for the table to send a message to his student. Naruto and Meizu came out of the ground behind Karen and surprised the girl. She seemed to have been quite focused on something which Naruto took as a sign of further trouble. "Decided to get it over with and find out," he asked. "Is something else out there, Karen?" Karen readjusted her glasses and replied, "I can sense several individuals in the distance. They arrived after you entered the cave and haven't moved since then." Naruto couldn't keep the frown off his face as he had the feeling that the newcomers were there to back up the ones that had been killed inside. He could ambush them with Meizu, but he also wanted to get back to the ship and examine the holocron with his master. Perhaps they could also find out more about the statue he now had. Thinking for a moment, he decided, "We should get back to the ship. If they follow us, we can send word ahead and ambush them. Considering we didn't find any treasure, I'm not sure they will be interested. They might look for their comrades first, which would give us enough time to get back." "No treasure?" Karen repeated with disappointment, and Meizu shook his head in the negative. "Hey, what's that you're holding?" Karen said while pointing at the statue. "Just something I was allowed to take from the tomb," replied Naruto as he got up and headed for the skiff with the other two in tow. "Tomb?" Karen questioned with a shiver. "Yes, a tomb, with several traps and now almost half a dozen corpses," finished Naruto as they made it to the skiff. Jumping on the repulsor craft, Naruto manned the controls and put them on a course back to the junkyard at the starport. A pair of electro-binoculars viewed the two kids and one adult get on board the ship and commented, "I guess they took out another group." "Shit, how many is that so far that we've lost to them? Mordo isn't going to be happy," commented another voice. "Who cares? What about the treasure?" "I certainly don't see any treasure," responded another man that was also looking through his own pair of electro-binoculars. "Use your eyes, idiots. Don't you see what that brat is holding?" "It can't be," said one in disbelief. "It certainly looks like it. The description is spot on, and it looks like the rumor was true. One of the Tessents was in that cave, and they managed to get it. There's your treasure," responded the leader of the group, and he put down his binoculars to start up the skiff they were on to give chase. "We're being followed," voiced Karen as she looked behind them and could make out a dark object moving over the surface in the distance behind them. "Is it revenge they're after?" wondered Naruto as he shook his head, thinking how foolish they must be considering what happened to the last two groups that came after them. "How many?" Naruto questioned as he banked the skiff to the left and began looking for rougher terrain to lose them in. 5. Karen responded while focusing on the fast-moving vessel. Meizu pulled out two blasters that he had taken from the dead thugs in the cave and moved to the back of the ship to engage when they got within range. Each vessel could take shots at the other, but given the distance, the blaster bolt would arc. It would both be difficult to aim, and a waste of energy cell power. They seem to be gaining on us," Karen hesitantly announced, and Naruto turned to glare at the very similar but apparently faster skiff that was indeed catching up. "They'll be in blaster range soon too. Is there any chance you could maybe shoot at them with that long-range weapon you've been carrying around?" Naruto asked Karen, and the girl blinked for a few seconds before realizing that he was talking about the rifle on her back. She had been carrying it around for the whole day, and completely forgotten about it. Fumbling slightly as she removed the strap from her shoulder, she placed the gun on the railing of the skiff and took aim at the skiff. Aiming for the shoulder, Karen steadied herself and pulled the trigger. At the same moment, Naruto veered the skiff slightly and Karen's trajectory was changed. "Get ready. We need to get alongside them or try to force them to stop," stated the driver of the skiff as the 4 other occupants of the craft pulled out their blasters and began taking aim at the skiff in front of them. Before they got in range, a shot rang out from the ship and a red bolt of plasma pierced through the head of one of the men standing on the front of the skiff. "Fuck! They got Olin right between the eyes. Get us the hell out of their fire," said one of the ducking men to the driver. Coming up on a canyon, the driver increased the altitude of the skiff and ran along the top of the canyon wall while the other skiff went into the canyon. Moving to the edge of the canyon, the other men moved to one side of the skiff and opened fire at the other skiff below them. Naruto knew what they were up to and engaged the ship's braking system. As their skiff pulled back, the blaster bolts missed and hit the area in front of them. As Meizu returned fire, Karen sat at the back of the ship realizing that she had shot one of the thugs in the face. Turning to Naruto, she asked, "Do you think he's still alive?" "No, I'm quite sure he's dead," replied Naruto as he focused on the winding canyon and trying to stay out of the majority of the blaster fire. Karen felt a sinking feeling in her stomach at the realization that she had killed someone. Glancing at the still sitting Karen and feeling her emotions, Naruto decided to try and say something encouraging. Given his line of work, he probably would have been killed at some point anyway. Karen's head dropped at the words and Naruto groaned before returning his full attention to piloting. Comforting someone was not something he was good at, nor something he tried to be good at. A fork in the canyon was coming up and he saw an opportunity for a brief relief from the shooting. Moving closer to the canyon wall, he waited until the last moment and swerved the skiff to take the opposite direction. The skiff barely missed the wall of the fork and the other skiff was caught by surprise, unable to continue their present course. With only a few seconds, Naruto's mind raced to find a solution to their problem. Their weapons could do little damage to a skiff and he thought about using ninjutsu, but on the rare chance that someone from the party survived, he didn't want anyone telling stories about children that could shoot lightning from their mouths or something like that. His thoughts were interrupted by a question from Meizu while the Kiri ninja was changing energy packs on the pilfered blasters. "What are they after?" The question was also something that he had been thinking. Their opponents hadn't even bothered to look in on their friends to see if they were dead or not. While it could just be that the group didn't care, he wondered if it was because of something else. The other skiff didn't seem to be trying to kill them. Most of their shots impacted the skiff and they weren't shooting at the pilot of the skiff himself either. "They want something from us," Naruto stated out loud and he looked around the skiff. The only thing they had was the holocron and the statue. It seemed unlikely that their pursuers were after the holocron given that few people even knew what they were. This left only the statue. Glancing at Meizu, he demanded, "I need a rock." The Kiri ninja gave him a strange look and tilted his head before shrugging and aimed his blasters at the rock face. Firing several shots, many pieces of rock were knocked loose. While keeping the skiff steady, Naruto used to the force to bring on the piece closer to the ship and it smacked onto the floor of the skiff, breaking into smaller pieces. The ship lurched slightly from the impact but Naruto held the repulsor lift vessel steady. "They're coming back," Karen informed them and Naruto acknowledged the warning while looking to Meizu. "Grab one of those rocks," he ordered and the still confused Kiri ninja complied. "Get ready to fire," said one of the crew to the others as they neared the edge of the canyon. With blasters out, the moment they reached the edge, they opened fire on the skiff. Each member was careful not to hit the pilot as they needed the fragile cargo on the skiff to remain intact. A moment later, one of the members of the other skiff tossed something into the air. The act caught the full attention of the other skiff. The blaster fire ceased as the white statue twirled in the air and kept increasing in height as it flew out of the canyon. The other skiff's occupants were completely distracted by the thrown object, and Naruto knew that it must have been far more valuable than he originally suspected. One of the men began pointing and the pilot responded with, "I see it. Get ready to grab it." The skiff moved with the tossed object and increased in altitude as far as it was able to. The statue reached the apex of its flight, and as soon as it started to fall, the skiff managed to reach it. One of the men grabbed the statue before it hit the deck of the skiff. Turning to show it off to the rest, he triumphantly announced, "I got it," as he held it up for the others to see. As the smoke from the henge dissipated, however, all the crew saw was a rock with several pieces of paper stuck on it. Each piece appeared to be sizzling. Meizu and Karen watched the explosive notes go off. While little damage was done to the skiff itself, the crew was either killed or maimed and the vessel went out of control. Quickly losing altitude, the vessel impacted the ground and grated across the ground of the canyon wall until it impacted something else. Their skiff remained on its course through the cold, barren landscape as a rising line of smoke grew in the distance. The ship traveled fast enough that the curvature of the planet's surface eventually concealed the rising smoke and any evidence that a crash had occurred in the distance. Karen tightened her all-weather cloak against the cold air that rushed past them and looked to Naruto, who was in the process of removing the small holographic communicator from his cloak. Plagueyes had been trying to reach them, but he didn't have a chance to respond. Placing the communicator on top of the console in front of him, a blue image of a sitting Gato soon appeared. Plagueyes studied his student for a moment and then asked, "Too busy to answer?" It wasn't really meant to be a joke, or even sarcasm, but more curiosity. "We ran into two groups of thugs from the owner of the starport. Kabuto's information wasn't completely accurate. It was a Sith tomb, but there was no treasure." Naruto began, and he could feel his master's interest in the tomb. "I'm not sure what species the Sith was, but we avoided the traps and were able to trade for a holocron and something else." "Trade?" questioned Plagueyes, as he had never heard of such a thing. "Sith didn't trade, they took what they wanted." "I can explain when we get back," responded Naruto, and Plagueyes nodded while adding, "Kabuto and his group have taken a ship and require assistance." "I understand, Master," said Naruto, and he quickly changed course to rendezvous with Kabuto at the Salt Rifts. "There is something else I want to discuss with you. I've been thinking about all the trouble that the spaceport owner has been causing us." Naruto began, and Plagueyes finished the sentence. "And you would like to do something about it?" Naruto nodded and began going over his newly formed plan with his master. Ironically, his master was also thinking of the same plan. The skiff pulled up near the news ship, and a shadow clone jumped off the skiff to go look at the ship. The real Naruto also jumped off the skiff and calmly went to talk with Kabuto. "Did you find any treasure?" asked Kabuto with interest. It wasn't every day that people got to go off in search of hidden treasure, and he regretted not being able to go himself. "No treasure," answered Naruto, and he could feel disappointment from Kabuto. "But we did find two other items that could prove just as good," he finished, and Kabuto's eyes widened with renewed interest. "My clone can pilot the ship back to the junkyard. We have something else we have to do, and you can ask my clone to help fill you in on what's going on." Naruto quickly added to cut of Kabuto's impending questions, and the snake-like ninja merely smirked. "Tayuya, you're coming with us," ordered Naruto, and he made to leave. The redhead scoffed at the order but said nothing as she got aboard the skiff. "You're going after someone, aren't you? Can I come?" asked a smiling Suigetsu, and Naruto answered, "We won't be killing anyone. On second thought, I'll remain here," stated Suigetsu, and he put his arms up behind his head as he walked back to the ship while Naruto turned around, jumping back on board the skiff, and prepared to leave. Karen looked to the other redhead and said, "You might want to put chakra in your feet and hold on to something." Seeing Karen do the same thing, Tayuya mimicked the other redhead and was thankful, as the skiff's sudden acceleration would likely have caused her to fall over. "Once Kabuto gets back to the junkyard, Master Plagueyes will be joining us at our location. said Naruto to the group members aboard the skiff. Where the hell are we going? Questioned the more outspoken redhead of the group. We're traveling to some ruins just outside of the starport, but we have to take a less direct route to get there, answered Naruto, and before anyone could say anything else, he continued with more details on the plan. A group on a skiff attacked us while we were returning to the junkyard. Coincidentally, our skiff was the same generic skiff as theirs. Master Playguys agreed that the boss of their group has given us enough trouble. An infiltration mission? Asked Meizu, and Naruto nodded in confirmation as he continued to fly the skiff. So we're not killing anyone? Inquired Karen, as that was what she overheard Naruto telling Suigetsu. No, we aren't going to kill them. We will take the facility that they have and then wait for Master Playguys to arrive. What's the little pig going to do? Questioned Tayuya, and Naruto overlooked the remark. He's going to turn them to our side, answered Naruto quizzically, and he could feel the confusion as to what Playguys was really going to do. But before that, Naruto began as he turned to Karen. We need to know what the men that you saw through your scope looked like. Finished Naruto, as he had never gotten a good look at the men they were shooting at. As the sensor system picked up an incoming craft, a silent alarm was sounded and most of the men went to the mounted gun positions on the outside of the castle, while one person looked through a pair of electro-binoculars to check out the incoming craft. Thinking it might be an attack, they were ready to fend off whatever it was despite their slightly reduced numbers. Zooming in on the vessel, the man recognized the ones aboard and cursed as he communicated to the others that it was their own vessel and not to shoot. The skiff slowed and moved near the raised ruins of what was once a very decorated castle but had worn down over a long period of time. Coming to a large door at ground level that was not part of the original castle, the skiff waited as the thick double doors began opening to reveal a large hangar bay. The disguised Naruto noted a large ship that would probably fit their needs well. His clone had informed him that the ship acquired by Kabuto and his group was probably just too small for them to all fit comfortably on it. Setting down in an open area of the large hangar, the disguised group got off the skiff and they all looked to one arm of the hangar wall when human-sized a metal door instantly opening not too far away. You idiot! What have I told you about sending a message ahead of you to let us know you're coming? One of these days we're going to blast you to dust by accident. Or maybe we'll just give a couple of warning shots to make you remember next time, said a man speaking directly to Naruto. Ignoring the disguised Tayuya's pointed look at the mention of being destroyed, Naruto said nothing at first as he wasn't sure how the man he was disguised as would answer. He analyzed the thoughts of the man talking to him in order to determine what the proper response was. Shrugging, Naruto said in a less than apologetic voice, "My bad." And the man's serious face changed to a slight frown. Shit! Naruto thought as the man spoke, is your voice alright? You sound different. Faking a cough, Naruto responded with a wave of his hand, inhaled some smoke. I'll be better in no time. The man looked confused for only a brief moment before saying, yeah, you'll be fine in no time. A brief moment of silence passed before he spoke again. What happened to Olin? He questioned as he looked over the group. Took a blaster bolt to the head, responded Meizu, and apparently the Kiri ninja had imitated the dead man's voice enough not to cause further suspicion. No one also noticed a slight squirm come from the disguised Karen at the back of the group when the death was mentioned. The man shook his head with a frown. I can't believe how many we've lost today. Have you heard anything from Rao's group? He questioned, and Naruto responded with a shake of his head and motioned with his hand while saying, there was nothing we could do. Well, I guess there was nothing you could do. Did you at least manage to bring anything back? He asked, and Naruto held up the white sculpture. No shit, you actually got it. Damn, all that fuss for something that doesn't look that spectacular. I expected it to be one of the finest pieces of art that I'd ever seen, said the man as he frowned over the sculpture. Aren't we expected? Asked Naruto with another wave of his hand, and the man quickly responded that they were. Mordo was expecting an update an hour ago, quickly added the man, and he moved to the door to take them to where Mordo was. As they moved through the facility, Naruto looked at all the wires running from some kind of generator deeper in the facility, and noted any security systems that could be a problem. The castle was incredibly old but had evidently been reinforced, or at least partially rebuilt in areas so the thugs could use it as a base to oversee the spaceport. Making a few turns and walking up 2 flights of metal stairs that had evidently been installed when the old stone steps collapsed, the group made it to what was likely the throne room and where Mordo was. One guard was stationed outside the room and pushed something on his gauntlet to unlock the doors and allow them entry. The man also appeared to speak into a communicator on his wrist and likely announced their arrival. The door opened and they walked into what was supposed to be throne room but looked more like a combination of dining hall and meeting room. There were large columns on the edges of the room that held up a high arched ceiling. The room was rectangular and had a large table on one side with numerous crates and pieces of equipment littering the other side. Whatever throne had once stood at the end of the room was crumbled and had not been replaced. Sitting at the table was apparently Mordo, who was a man of average build with what was once jet black hair but now featured quite a few gray hairs. It was evident that the man hadn't shaved in a few days. Looking to the group, Mordo's eyes instantly fell up on the statue. The man rose from his seat and walked over to them without looking up as his eyes were glued to the item in Naruto's left hand. Naruto could feel greed and then power swirl around at the man's mind. An obsession over the item was definitely present as well. He's been searching for it for a while, Naruto guessed. So fixated on the statue, the man never noticed Naruto pull out his blaster. At the speed it was drawn, the man likely wouldn't have even been able to react even if he had noticed. A stun bolt struck the man in the chest, and he quickly crumpled to the ground. Naruto noted how effective the stun setting on his blaster worked as Meizu took care of the man they had walked with as well as the guard at the door. Tayuya, Naruto stated, and the henge soon fell on the redhead as she pulled out her flute and began playing. The castle was actually quite perfect for her talents as her music would echo throughout the entire facility. As the melody traveled, the alarm was never even sounded. Each person in the facility began seeing feathers slowly falling in their field of vision. The sight made them incredibly sleepy, and they ended up collapsing where they stood. Naruto and Karen quickly acted to break the high-ranking genjutsu on themselves, and after the melody concluded, Naruto created a group of shadow clones and sent them into the facility with Meizu to collect the sleeping thugs. Scrunching his eyes, Naruto removed his breather mask and pulled out a chair at the meeting table to sit down in. He placed the statue on the table and looked at it, as if trying to figure out what secrets it apparently held. The material seemed more interesting in the better light, but it still didn't appear all that valuable to him. He could just read the leader's mind and find out more about it, but he was tired and just wanted to rest for a little while. His entire day had been taxing, and he leaned back in the chair while resting his eyes. All he had to do now was wait for Playguys to show up. His master would likely pilot the ship Kabuto procured, and it should arrive in a few moments. Karen walked up and sat in another chair after checking to see if any person in the castle was still moving or somehow not affected by the genjutsu. The redhead leaned forward and rested her head on her arms. Instead of moving to the table, Tayuya merely walked to one of the columns and leaned against it. She too was tired but didn't want to appear that tired. She did, however, think about sitting down as her feet were quite sore. Looking to Naruto, she remarked, "Tired?" Naruto frowned at her statement, but his eyes then widened as his blaster shot to his hand as he stood in an instant and pointed it ahead of him. "The fuck?" Tayuya yelled in surprise as she looked at Naruto. It was just a criticism, but she quickly noticed that the blaster wasn't pointed directly at her. It was pointed slightly to her right. Her blood ran cold at the realizing and the serious look on Naruto's face. "You can come out now," stated Naruto as he looked at the darkened area between the columns. They were offset at least a few feet from the wall and created a completely shadowed area. A droid. I missed a droid. He realized as he couldn't feel any life signs in the room but was certain something was there. All his tiredness was gone and replaced by alertness over the new threat. His mind quickly accepted the possibility of an assassin droid, but he then realized that it would have likely fired upon him already. A few seconds passed as Karen peered over the edge of the table she was crouched behind. Naruto looked down the sight on his blaster, and Tayuya stood completely still with her back against the wide column. One hand on her blaster, and the other holding a kunai. A figure soon slowly emerged from the shadows, and it took shape as that of a short droid, cylindrical in shape, with a curved top and two wheeled legs with a smaller third leg jutting out from the bottom of the cylinder at the front. It had a mostly white body with some red markings and looked well worn. The three stared at the droid as it looked back at them. A few beeps came from the droid and caused Taiya and Karen to jump slightly. What the hell is it? Is it dangerous? Oh fuck me. It's just an astromech, thought Naruto, and his complete overreaction made him do something that he hadn't in a long time. He laughed. He laughed as the obviously nervous droid's head swiveled around and its photoreceptors took in the three individuals. He laughed at the strange looks from the two redheads and had to sit down because he was laughing so hard. The droid was completely harmless, but a moment prior they had been just afraid of it as it was of them, possibly more afraid, and the thought just made him laugh harder. He even dropped his blaster. While the laughter filled the room, the two redheads looked on in shock at their leader. Neither had ever heard him laugh before and thought perhaps he lost his mind.